So apologizing for a video taking longer than necessary for me to complete has become a bit of a trend of mine, and today you're going to hear me do it twice. I hit a bit of a motivational low point during the script writing, and I had a really hard time getting it done. I finished my initial playthrough of both games on the 29th of April, and it took me about 3 weeks to complete the script. I'd be lying if I said that my lack of motivation didn't play a part in why it took so long, but a lot of the script writing for this video was very time consuming, especially during the Doom Eternal analysis sections. It isn't hard to go back and test something in-game before writing down the results, but trying to do so on PS4 without access to a console that can be used to spawn in enemies is slightly tougher, and trying to replicate what you're testing without accidentally killing the thing you're testing it on and being forced to reload a checkpoint is even tougher than that. I don't mean to imply that any of this was too difficult, but it did contribute to why it took so long for me to get everything put together, and this is quite possibly my most thorough analysis to date. I want to thank everybody for your patience, and I hope you enjoy the video. Doom as a franchise has come a long way. What was once little more than a Wolfenstein 3D clone, it quickly became one of the most iconic franchises in gaming history, and the progenitor of the first-person shooter genre. While other games like Halo would change the formula for many years to come, and Wolfenstein would drop the run-and-gun style for cover shooting and stealth mechanics, Doom has more or less stayed the same, even if it did go through its edgy teenage phase with Doom 3. There are a lot of games in the Doom franchise, 7 to be exact if you don't count the HD remasters. This video will be covering the reboot titles, Doom 2016 and Doom Eternal. I'll also be discussing the game's stories and Eternal's DLC. I will be discussing some of Doom's lore, specifically on the details that tie into the greater continuity of the franchise, but it'll mostly be for the purpose of understanding Doom Eternal's main story. I originally had a section of this video dedicated to the difference between the soundtrack and Doom Eternal's base game versus the DLCs, but I ultimately decided to cut it. I'm not afraid to talk about or even criticize music, but the discussion didn't flow well and put more of a focus on how the tracks were mixed instead of the musicality of it. I think both the base game and DLC soundtracks have their highs and lows, but it's nothing worth going into detail about. I won't be going into a lot of detail about the multiplayer features of these games, mostly because I just got stable internet within a week of recording this, and multiplayer games are usually off limits for me. I would like to briefly discuss some of Doom 2016's more notable online features, starting with SnapMap. This is basically a community custom map tool that gives you a near endless amount of content to play through so long as people continue supporting it, and considering that new maps are being made to this day, I believe this is a feature that is here to stay. Just keep in mind this is a community feature, so not every map you play is going to be a meticulously crafted masterpiece. I actually had to quit playing one of them because it was beginning to make me feel nauseous, and I'm not the type of person that normally gets sick from a game. It's a cool feature, but the main focus of this video is going to be on the game's main attraction, which is its campaign. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into it. Doom 2016 was a very important game for the franchise. Not only was it the first original and official Doom content since 2005, but it also introduced the franchise to an entire generation of players who either hadn't experienced it or didn't care about it before its release. While the Wolfenstein reboots would depart from its roots by fundamentally changing how the game is played, Doom would try to resemble the originals more closely. The original Doom games mostly consisted of you running around an arena and killing demons before progressing through the level, while Doom 3 took a more horror-based approach. Doom 2016 feels like the game that brought these two elements together to create something unique. It's interesting to me that id managed to create this impression because from everything I've read, that was never their intention. Doom 2016's development was hell. The game was announced in 2008, and after being universally criticized as mediocre, even by some people within the studio, the game was cancelled. Redesigns for the game began in 2011, and they led to the Doom that we see today. Nothing that I've read about this game's development mentions that there were any elements of horror in mind while creating it. In fact, many of the things point to the opposite. Hugo Martin said that the inspirations behind Doom 2016 were rock and roll and He-Man, yet the game manages to have a strong atmosphere of horror throughout its runtime. The game never truly feels like it's trying to scare you, but I'd be lying if I said that I've never felt on edge while playing through the game. It's the same feeling I get while playing Bloodborne, where the horror mostly comes from the atmosphere and knowing that you're overwhelmingly outnumbered by the beasts you're facing. Even on this last playthrough, I couldn't help but acknowledge that some of the levels do a great job at building tension. One of the greatest examples is the build-up to your first encounter with a Hell Knight. The first time you see it is through a recording, where you watch it tear these UAC scientists apart before dragging one of them away. This is still pretty early in the game, and you only have a couple weapons by this point, so the confidence of new players might feel a little bit shook when they first see this. It also puts the Hell Knight's existence in the back of your mind, which will only make the anxiety of actually facing it even worse as you progress through the level. Then, you finally do fight it, and depending on your skill level, you'll either handle it swiftly or frantically unload everything you have into it until it's dead. The game then makes you fight several of them in confined spaces, and spawns more in areas that you've already cleared just to screw with you. This is honestly one of the most memorable parts of my first playthrough of this game, and I vividly remember unloading my entire ammo supply of micro missiles into one that caught me off guard. 2016 did a great job at making this encounter more intimidating than it actually was, and that's something I appreciate about it. There's another reason why 2016 managed to have such a great atmosphere though, and it's something a little more fundamental: immersion. Doom 2016 is a very immersive experience, much more than Eternal in almost every way. You get short introductions to many of the enemies whenever you see them for the first time, you acquire weapons by either finding secret caches or taking them off of a dead body, you get keycards by finding them on dead personnel and taking it from their corpse, and the game itself has a strong sense of believability to it. Let's take the moment that you first acquire the combat shotgun, where you pry it from the hands of a dead security guard who had been crushed by a door. Compare this to Doom Eternal, where you first acquire the heavy cannon by approaching the big green gun floating in midair. Everything is darker, grittier, and puts off a strong feeling of isolation. What better way to communicate to the player that they're on their own than making them use somebody's severed torso to pass a retinal scan? There are very specific reasons that these were removed from Eternal that I'll talk about later, but I personally prefer the way 2016 handled these elements. There were also little things that added to the immersion as well. Whenever you drop from a high area, you get this message on your HUD saying impact compensation, which is using the Praetor suit to explain why there's no fall damage. The only issue I have with this is it makes the Slayer appear weaker than he is, as if he can't handle a drop from that height without the suit, which I don't believe is accurate from a lore perspective. The stagger animation that comes with the drop can also interrupt the flow of combat sometimes, although it doesn't happen often. There are also the death animations. Every time you die, you'll receive a unique animation that shows the enemy killing you. The most common death animation I encountered was blowing myself up, since explosive barrels can nuke you if you're not careful. The combination of these managed to make Doom 2016 feel much more immersive than Eternal and add a strong atmosphere of horror despite never actually being scary. I'd be lying if I said that I don't miss the more grounded approach that this game took when compared to Eternal, but that's also just my preference. So why were these elements removed? It's simple. It's all about the pacing. There's a lot more downtime between combat arenas in 2016 than there is in Eternal. This isn't really an issue for the game since everything is slower paced in general, but this would be a problem in Eternal. Watching a 5-second animation every time you acquire a new weapon or keycard adds up over the course of the game, and those are 5 seconds that you could be better spent getting to the action. This is also likely why the rune challenges were removed and replaced with the secret encounters, because spending time in a loading screen to load a separate area for a 20-second challenge breaks up the flow of the gameplay. This can also be seen when you compare the platforming sections of both games. In an attempt to make everything faster, Eternal took a more arcadey approach to game design that resulted in the floating guns and keycards, and if the cost of faster pacing was immersion, then so be it. I think both methods of pacing work for their respective games because of their consistency. Going from 2016 to Eternal back at launch was jarring because I was expecting something more akin to 2016, and I remember disliking it at first, but I've come to realize that the game would suffer if these changes weren't made. Personally, I think 2016's pacing and immersion are the best things it does, but after coming back to it over a year later, I couldn't help but feel like the experience dragged a little because of it. With that discussion out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the game's general mechanics. There are many notable mechanics in Doom 2016 that exist to add depth to the game's combat. You can find power-ups in the combat arenas that are meant to help you during the tougher encounters, each of which are color-coded so you can quickly identify them. There's Haste, which as the name suggests, makes you move quicker and shoot faster. Berserk instantly glory kills enemies with a unique animation where you rip them apart with your bare hands. Quad Damage gives you a 4 times damage multiplier, and Invulnerability makes you, well, invulnerable. Not all of them are particularly exciting, but they help out in a pinch. I generally tried to avoid them on this playthrough because I wanted the extra challenge, but I did resort to using them every now and then. The next notable mechanic would be the runes. These are passive bonuses that are unlocked by completing rune challenges, which can be found throughout the levels. The challenges themselves aren't very interesting, and going through a loading screen just to attempt them took away from the experience. You can hold up to 3 runes, but each slot is unlocked after completing a certain number of challenges, with the final slot opening after 8. I never actually invested in the runes on my previous playthroughs, and they aren't as essential to completing the game as they are in Doom Eternal. Other upgrades come in a more traditional way. You can collect Predator Suit tokens as you explore the levels that can be used to upgrade your suit. There are 5 categories for the upgrades, each consisting of 3 options. Environmental resistance decreases the damage taken by things like explosive barrels and weapon self-harm. Area scan technology basically just covers what the map will reveal during exploration. Equipment systems handles things like your grenade recharge and carrying capacity, although grenades in this game are easy to forget about entirely. Power-up effectiveness will add bonuses to power-ups, like refilling your health upon pickup or activating a blast wave after it wears off. Lastly, dexterity makes you trash at Dark Souls. These upgrades give you faster weapon and mod swaps, as well as faster climbing. And the only ones I would say are essential are environmental resistance and dexterity. The last of the upgrades come in the form of Argent Energy Cells. These offer a basic selection of more ammo, health, or armor. Armor in this game is honestly pretty useless because you don't have a reliable way of refilling it, but it's still worth upgrading. There's a rune that grants you armor on glory kills, but it only gives you 6 at a time, which is basically worthless unless you glory kill every enemy in the room without taking damage. Just like everything else, this would be improved in Doom Eternal with the Flame Belch. The game is very generous with the amount of resources you're allowed to max out at, and in hindsight it almost seems unnecessary to have this much available. Moving on from upgrades, let's talk about weapons. As you play through the game, you'll acquire an impressive arsenal of different weapons that can be used when the situation calls for them. But it's not the weapons themselves that come in clutch, it's their mods. There are 2 weapon mods per weapon, excluding the pistol, and not all of them are equal in effectiveness. For example, the heavy assault rifle has micro-missiles and the tactical scope, but the former is much more effective than the latter. I decided to fully upgrade the scope just to see how it played out, and the results were underwhelming. Micro-missiles offer splash damage at a higher rate than the tactical scope, which makes them much more effective, and you can't do this with the scope. Once a weapon mod is fully upgraded, you unlock a mastery challenge that gives 1 final bonus upon completion. These challenges are pretty straightforward, but they do have one problem. Since challenges persist after death, you can grind them out by repeatedly killing basic fodder demons and reloading a checkpoint. This means that you can theoretically get every weapon mod you have upgraded to mastery in less than an hour, which defeats the purpose of the challenge altogether. However, the only real solution for this would be to make challenges not persist after death, and having your progress repeatedly get set back during tough encounters is a terrible idea. I also want to admit that I am 100% guilty of using this exploit every chance I get, and it is a very effective way of getting through some of the more tedious challenges. The last of your equipment that's worth mentioning are the grenades. There are 3 types of grenades: frags, which are the standard for most first-person shooters, siphon grenades, which leech health from demons within a certain area, and the hologram, which is used to confuse the AI. I oftentimes forget that the equipment existed, and it's honestly pretty underwhelming. If I needed to use a grenade, then I would typically use the explosive shot on my shotgun. If I needed health, then I'd glory kill an enemy. Confusing the AI is seldom necessary, and I can only think of one instance where I actually used the hologram, and it was an accident. I was trying to throw a grenade. Overall, you have an extensive arsenal with many useful weapon mods, although not every mod is equal in effectiveness. Raw damage numbers aren't always the most important thing in combat, but it does have a significant advantage over some tactical uses. The Gatling rotator may help you spin up your chain gun before firing, but why bother with that when mobile turret offers a greater amount of DPS? Why bother headshotting a Hell Knight with a precision bolt when you can shoot 2 of them with siege mode? There's a very obvious meta in this game that I'll talk about in a moment, which brings us to the gameplay. I need to mention before anything else that I played this game on Ultra Violence difficulty. I wanted to play it on Nightmare, but doing so would have disabled tutorials, and I wanted to compare how they were handled in this game versus Doom Eternal. Joke's on me because the tutorials are so minimal that I never saw any of them after the first few missions. It's possible that playing on a lower difficulty made the game far less challenging than it could have been, but I don't think that it would have changed much for reasons I'll get into in a moment. Don't worry, I gave penance by playing the Ancient Gods Part 1 on Nightmare difficulty, and yes, I did all the Slayer gates. I also beat the final boss of that DLC twice, so I think I've redeemed myself. I'd also like to say that almost every criticism I have about this game has been addressed and improved upon in Doom Eternal, which is honestly shocking. It's not too often that you see a studio address and correct damn near everything wrong with their game in the sequel. With that said, let's get into it. I have the most to say about Doom 2016's combat, so I'm going to save that discussion for last. For now, let's start off with what I have the least to say about, the platforming. To put it simply, the platforming in this game is awful. It's not particularly difficult, but it has one serious flaw. A flaw that can make it more annoying than anything else. Anytime you fall off the map in this game, you need to reload a checkpoint. As you can probably imagine, this gets annoying throughout the course of the game, and an overwhelming majority of the platforming sections are over pitfalls that can kill you. This gets even worse whenever the game starts introducing lost souls who can stop your momentum if they hit you in midair. There's also the chance that Doom Boy simply won't grab the ledge like he's supposed to, which can send you all the way back to a checkpoint. This never happened to me, but I have seen footage of it happening to other people. You're also at an increased risk of this problem happening if you're exploring the levels thoroughly, which brings us to the next subject. Exploration in 2016 isn't bad, but it has its fair share of issues too. Before we get into those, let's talk about the things that this game does right. First off, we have the classic levels. If you explore thoroughly, or you just get lucky, you'll occasionally come across a lever that once activated will open a secret door to one of the game's many classic levels. These are just like the Nightmare levels in the Wolfenstein reboots, and they mostly exist to serve as a callback to the original games. Besides these, exploration mostly serves to support the game's progression. You can find suit tokens and field drones, but you can also get a hold of certain weapons at least one level early. The issue with the game's exploration lies in the fact that not all areas are accessible once you've left. I spent 25 minutes during one level trying to figure out how to get back to an area that I'd already been to before, and every possible option was met with an invisible wall. I eventually had to give up and just move on. Neither the platforming nor exploration in this game are particularly great, which is why they mostly take a backseat to the game's main attraction, the combat. Playing through Doom 2016 after so many hours in Doom Eternal is the game feel equivalent of running with weights on your feet. My first few hours were spent adjusting to everything that was lacking. I think criticizing a game just because it doesn't offer the same experience as the sequel is a bit ridiculous, so I prefer to view this as a compliment to how much it improved the formula in the future. The biggest surprise, however, wasn't how much was different between these games, but rather how much was the same. I was really surprised to see how many things remain consistent between the two games, especially where the weapon mods are concerned. Almost every mod in this game was improved and carried over to Eternal, with the only exception being the Gatling rotator for the chain gun and the second shot for your super shotgun. Some mods got extensive reworks, like the stun bomb being replaced with the microwave beam and siege mode being reworked into the more balanced destroyer blade, but the core identity of these mods is still present in this game. It's actually very impressive to see how many things it got right with this game, which would only be improved upon in the sequel. Unfortunately, they weren't able to nail the vision they had for the game's combat on the first attempt. Doom Eternal fundamentally changed how I view 2016's combat system. The way that I and many others played this game was by running around the arena with a super shotgun and only switching weapons if I absolutely had to, like using lock-on rockets for a summoner. The way that the game was intended to be played was by performing different weapon combos and experimenting with the toolset. The game doesn't do anything to nudge the player in that direction, and it was never necessary to get through any of the encounters. On this playthrough, I decided to try playing the game in this way, and dare I say, it holds up pretty well. It's a lot slower than Eternal, but that has its benefits. There's a technique in the game where you swap weapon mods right before switching to another weapon, and when you swap back, the mod has already been replaced, effectively bypassing the animation. This is fairly simple to pull off in 2016, but it's something that I never managed to successfully do when I returned to Eternal. I've heard from some high-skill players on YouTube that the timing is much more precise, but I think that it's impossible to pull off on PS4 due to the weapon wheel already having an option to switch mods before selecting that weapon. When played this way, Doom 2016's combat is very engaging and rewarding, but unfortunately this isn't the most effective way to play. There is one weapon combo that undeniably beats out everything else in the game in raw damage output and simplicity: the Siege Mode Super Shotgun combo. The Siege Mode can kill multiple enemies in a single shot, but requires you to stand still while charging unless you finish the Mastery Challenge. Even so, this could be negated by hitting a jump pad before charging. This combo trivializes combat, and there's a reason that I avoided using it until almost the end of the game, because I knew once I started, I wouldn't stop. If you do decide to ignore this tactic, you'll find 2016's combat to be very enjoyable, but you would be intentionally limiting yourself and extending the length of combat encounters by doing so. This may seem like a short list of problems that the game has, which is why I mentioned that this game got a lot of the formula right on the first attempt. The core gameplay is pretty simple, but the depth of the combat system is undermined by a single combo that serves as a cure-all for any problem you face in combat, including the bosses. I think that 2016 is better than the sum of its parts, especially whenever you take into consideration the presentation and build-up to its encounters. All we're left with at this point is the story, so I suppose we ought to talk about that too. This is where the spoilers begin. Doom 2016 Story is a difficult subject to tackle, because it's never been the focus of the franchise. I considered breaking the channel tradition and not covering the story at all, but there's still a lot that can be said about it even if it mostly exists as a backdrop for the gameplay. What I will say is that there won't be an in-depth analysis about the events of the story like in my other videos. The focus is going to be more over how the story is presented to the player, and the heavier discussions will be over the more noteworthy levels and boss encounters. As I said earlier, there is going to be a lore discussion later in this video where I try to fill in the gaps about the Doom universe, but for now I'd like to talk about the story for this game. I think the handling of Doom 2016 Story is one of the few things that the game beats Eternal at. Even if you don't fully understand the lore behind the events, you always know what you're doing, why you're doing it, who is involved, and who is responsible. I think there are several reasons for this. For starters, the entire game is focused on one centralized threat. You're dealing with one facility on Mars, and the regions of hell you travel to don't have a very strong focus on them. This makes the events of the game feel more condensed and easier to understand. Another reason would be the fact that most things that would require a greater amount of lore knowledge to understand are packaged with something that doesn't. A good example comes pretty late in the game. You're sent to get something called the demonic crucible to shut down the source of hell's energy called the Well, and by doing this you'll close the hell portal on Mars. Several things happen during this mission that require some amount of lore knowledge to understand, like what the Well is, how it produces energy, and who the night-looking ghosts guiding you through the area are. But all of that is easier to ignore because of what you do know. This is the source of the hell portal on Mars, and we're here to shut it down. The game is very rarely presented in a way that feels like the player character knows more about what's going on than the player, and so the story feels more cohesive as a whole. Ironically, Doom Eternal's story could be described in the exact same way, but it doesn't work as well because of how many things are being introduced and never explained. As always, there is a specific reason for why it is done this way that I'll discuss in that section, but I have to admit that the 2016 story is much easier to understand in almost every capacity. On that note, let's go ahead and get into the story. The game begins with you waking up chained to a table. You break your shackles and smash a zombie's head in, then grab the pistol and get to work killing everybody in the room. Interacting with the nearby terminal will give you a holographic reconstruction of what happened here, which is something you can do several times throughout the story. You can see that you were previously trapped within a sarcophagus, and a woman says that you need to be contained. You then grab the Predator suit and get some strange imagery on screen. You try to get a status report of the facility you're in, but one of the satellites is down, so it comes back incomplete. You're then contacted by one of the survivors, Samuel Hayden, who really likes the word resolve.
I think we can work together and resolve this problem in a way that benefits us both.
You're quickly introduced to glory kills and then get the combat shotgun. In the next room, you'll find your first gore nest. These are small hell portals scattered throughout the game that begin a combat encounter once you destroy them. I'm pretty sure that all of them are mandatory, but there may be one or two that can be skipped. A neat little detail is that if you stare into them, you can actually see into hell. You see another hologram in the next hallway where the woman says you can't be allowed to leave or you'll ruin everything. You then make it to the elevator where you get the best intro in the entire franchise.
I'm willing to take full responsibility for the horrible events of the last 24 hours, but you must understand. Our interest in their world was purely for the betterment of mankind. Everything has clearly gotten out of hand now, yes. But it was worth the risk, I assure you.
There's something about 2016's version of that track that never gets old. Once you're outside, you can see that you're on a remote facility on Mars. You make your way to the Resource Operations Facility to repair the satellite. You're then introduced to Vega, the station's AI, and he tells you about the combat upgrade challenges that will reward you with weapon upgrade points. You proceed through the level until you find the chainsaw, which will give you ammo when used on the demons. Something I needed to get used to was equipping the chainsaw before being able to use it, which isn't the case in Eternal. After borrowing a dead man's hand so you can realign the satellite, Samuel Hayden blocks your access and tells you to go to the Vega terminal so you can view the results of the scan. Once there, Samuel tells you that it's your birthday and gives you one of those plasma balls that I always wanted as a kid. Doomlad squeezes it a little too tightly and gets an upgrade after breaking it, which makes me jealous because the only thing I got from breaking mine was a tumor. Samuel then unlocks the scan results, and what you learn is that a hell wave was activated in a place called the Lazarus facility that turned most of the workers into the zombies you see walking around. Olivia Pierce, the woman from the hologram, released the rest of the demons from their holding cells. Samuel says that the research focused on exploiting hell's hell's resources for the betterment of mankind, and that what you're seeing is the cost of progress. Vega informs you that the demons have overrun the foundry and are causing a meltdown that could destroy the entire facility. This mission has you taking out the various gore nests to lift the security lockdown and restart the turbines to prevent the meltdown. Whenever you're finished, you run into Olivia in a nearby control center. She locks Vega out of the system and begins rerouting power to the Argent Energy Tower, and Samuel says that she's going to try and tear open a portal to hell. He also says that Olivia has taken full control of the system and locked everybody else out, so you'll need to shut down the Argent Tower manually from the surface. This next mission has you running around the tower and disabling the Argent energy filters.
We're only temporarily disabling the tower. You need to remove each lens individually. Carefully release the hinges.
Samuel tries to reason with you by saying that the Argent energy solved an energy crisis on Earth, but that doesn't stop us from destroying everything. By the time you destroyed the last filter, you have effectively removed Argent energy from the solar system. Vega tells you that Olivia is taking an Argent accumulator to the tower to tear open the portal manually, and that he can track its signature for you. This starts one of the more popular missions you can find in games, Crazy Bitch Extermination. This next mission mostly consists of platforming, and you're given the double jump in the form of these thruster boots. You fight your way to the top of the tower just in time to see Olivia rupture the accumulator and tear open the portal to hell. You then fight off several waves of demons that spawn in, with each wave getting progressively harder. After fighting for a while, all those offensive jokes I made back in high school finally caught up with me and were teleported to hell. You have two goals during this mission. Step 1, acquire the Gauss Cannon. Step 2, get back to Mars before you die of cringe. You'll see the holograms of Samuel Hayden and his merry band of merry men traveling through this area sometime in the past. They mark their path with glowing stakes, so you follow it in hopes of finding an exit. You can also find these lore markers that will shed some light on the Slayer's background. To give you the short version, the Doomslayer was the one who first stood against the forces of Hell, and he ultimately decided to remain in Hell after his soul was, quote, tainted beyond ascension. These testaments make reference to a race called the Night Sentinels, the Slayer's battle against a Titan, which he won of course, and an unnamed ally of the Slayers who betrayed Hell in order to grant him supernatural abilities. Eventually, the Slayer was led into a trap where he was sealed in a sarcophagus, and these testaments were left as a reminder for why he should never be released. I was actually really impressed how much these testaments make sense after playing Eternal and reading its codex, because I was always under the impression that it conflicted with what was said here. The issue was that I always assumed that these events took place entirely within Hell itself when it actually doesn't. You follow the path until you finally come to the room where the sarcophagus was kept, and you see that Samuel Hayden was the only person who survived the journey. All his guards were killed along the way. You use the teleporter that was set up to retrieve your sarcophagus to get back to Mars. Samuel contacts you once you've returned and says that the Argent Tower was destroyed and there is no way to close the Hell portal from this side. The Hell energy they were refining into Argent flows from a place they call the Well, so there may still be a way to shut the portal. Vega is trying to access Olivia's files, so you head to the terminal for more information. Once you make it there, you learn about an artifact that Olivia and the UAC had been studying that should have the answers you're looking for. Samuel tells you how to access the Lazarus facility at the Advanced Research Complex. You'll need to take the tram to get there, so that's your objective for this level. Once you're there, you can see another hologram of Samuel and Olivia. He was trying to shut down her project after he suspected that she was under Hell's influence. You then get to meet the man face to face, and he installs a tether into your suit so he can pull you back from Hell the next time you're there. If you try to kill him, this happens.
Save your ammunition.
Samuel tells you that he's still upset over the whole destroying the tower incident, but he's still committed to helping you close the portal. He tells you about the artifact in Olivia's chamber, the Helix Stone, saying that she was obsessed with it. The Helix Stone showed the UAC how to harness Hell's energy from the Well, and he believes it will show you how to shut it down. You then fight your way through the Advanced Research Complex, and after borrowing a man's severed torso, you get a hold of this beauty. This is the BFG 9000, or as we here at Salty Shrimp Productions like to call it, the designated panic weapon. One shot from this bad boy will insta-kill everything that isn't a boss, barring that one glitch that abuses the game's weapon wheel to freeze the orb in place without actually slowing down the damage over time effect. I never did this because exploits are for scrubs and I already abused the Gauss Cannon, so... Once you've made it to the Lazarus Labs, you can see that the place is overrun with demons. You fight your way to Olivia's chamber where you see a hologram of a spooky sounding voice telling her that she's a failure for allowing you to be recovered. You interact with the Helix Stone and you see some more imagery. Samuel recognizes it as something called the Crucible, and Vega tells you that you'll need to rupture another Argent accumulator to create another portal to Hell. He says that you can find one within a certain demon test subject. On your way there, you pass the hell wave that Olivia set off. Samuel says that he recovered your sarcophagus because he knew that Olivia was unstable, and he knew that only you could stop the demons if this happened. You shut down the hell wave and proceed forward, eventually coming to a room with armor drops and some BFG ammo. Anybody who's played a video game before knows this means boss fight. You then come face to face with the Cyber Demon. The Cyber Demon is a pushover. His moveset is pretty basic, and the only real danger comes from getting out of the way before he hits you with a slam attack. After beating the first phase, you rupture the accumulator within his chest and use it to teleport back to Hell. Once there, the Hell energy resurrects the demon for phase 2. This gives the Cyber Demon the ability to put up a wall around you and try to hit you with projectiles, but this just gives you an opportunity to soak it with damage by using lock-on rockets. Don't get me wrong, the boss still killed me during this phase, but mostly because I got cocky and let it hit me with like a dozen rockets. Other than that, the fight isn't much of a challenge, but it's still enjoyable nonetheless. Once it's dead, you proceed to the Titan's Realm to find the Crucible. The next 2 levels are almost entirely combat-based, so there's nothing worth mentioning until we reach the next boss fight, the Hellguard. The fight is slightly more complex than the Cyber Demon, but it's still incredibly easy. The Hellguard is surrounded by a bubble that makes it invulnerable, so you need to wait for it to drop in order to attack. It will sometimes begin charging a shot, and if you do enough damage, you'll stagger it. Once this happens, you're free to shred its health bar with Siege Mode and the Super Shotgun. Once it's dead, 2 more will spawn without the bubble, so as long as you have a better reaction time than the average games journalist, then you can end this entire boss fight in under 3 minutes. In fact, I have a video on my second channel of me doing just that, and the only reason that it is over 3 minutes is because 30 seconds of it is the introductory cutscene. Once they're dead, you take the Crucible and get saluted by some ghostly Night Sentinels. Samuel then activates the tether and pulls you back to the Mars facility. Vega tells you that you're going to destroy his processing core in order to perform one final hell jump and reach the well's location. It's strange that Samuel would agree to this for reasons we'll get into later, but for now, that's the objective. You destroy his coolant generators, then make it to his processor, and before sealing the deal, the Slayer backs him up onto a local disk and takes it. You then blow his processor and get sucked into hell one last time. The next mission, just like the last few, is almost entirely combat as you make your way around the well and shut it down with the Crucible. I think the well itself is interesting because of how it ties into the greater lore of Doom Eternal, especially regarding the culture of the Night Sentinels and the location that you're currently in, Argent D'Nur. Once you've laid all 3 wraiths to rest, you proceed forward and see that Olivia Pierce is still alive. She now realizes that she was lied to by the demons, shocking, I know, and then she gets smitten and struck into the floor, arising as our final boss, the Spider Mastermind. This fight is significantly tougher than the other 2, but that's mostly because there are a few gimmicks you need to watch out for. You need to jump or crouch to avoid the lasers, avoid the floor when it turns into a damage zone, and shoot its head when it begins charging the pillars you stand on in order to stagger it. It did manage to kill me a few times while I was figuring all this out, but I wouldn't consider it particularly challenging. It just took me a while to learn its moves. Once it's dead, you stick the BFG in its mouth and blow its head off, and then you're pulled back to Mars. Samuel then tells you that he can't allow you to stop his research into Argent Energy, stating that things will be much worse without it. He then takes the Crucible, claiming he can use it to continue his work. He says that he can't kill you, but he won't allow you to stand in his way, then he reverses the tether and sends you back to Hell. And that's Doom 2016. I think all in all, it's still a pretty good game. Once you've gotten used to the mechanics, you'll notice how much fun the game can be, but it can also be frustrating in some areas, especially the platforming sections. Still, I think this game is greater than the sum of its parts, and it's a very strong foundation for everything that came after. I've noticed a little bit of a 2016 revival on YouTube in the Doom community, especially after so much time in Doom Eternal. Some people are making unofficial master levels for the game, and they're going back and testing things out and really starting to notice all the things that were there that nobody really paid attention to in the past. So I think, in a way, Doom Eternal made 2016 more enjoyable, but at the same time, 2016 is less enjoyable because of what Doom Eternal added. Which brings us to our next topic. I've heard a lot of people refer to Doom Eternal as the Dark Souls of first-person shooters. I think calling anything the Dark Souls of blank is an overused metaphor by this point, and I've always regarded Doom Eternal as something else entirely. So I'm going to refer to it as the God of War 3 of first-person shooters. You could also compare it to Devil May Cry 5, but I haven't played that game, so I'm gonna stick with what I know. If you've seen my video on the God of War franchise and watched the part about God of War 3, then you'll probably see why I made this comparison, but for everybody else, I'll go ahead and explain it. God of War 3 was the game that added the most amount of depth to the franchise. It's the game that gave you an expanded toolset and free reign to play around with them however you choose. Certain tools were better depending on the circumstance, but everything was viable, and you're rewarded for playing aggressively while utilizing everything at your disposal. The mechanics that were added in God of War 3 created a skill cap that could only be achieved by people who played it multiple times through. Doom Eternal did all these things within its own genre, and it's very successful. However, unlike God of War 3, which can be beat by hitting square square triangle for its entirety, Doom Eternal pushes you to use your toolset more and more as the game goes on, which brings us to the gameplay. There's a certain point in some more modern games I've played where everything about it is so complex that the game itself seems to almost break as a result of everything that's going on. I think this is the unfortunate and unavoidable fact that having a more complicated system means more areas where things can go wrong. That's not to say that Doom Eternal's gameplay is unplayable. It's actually very impressive how solid everything about the game is, but most of the issues that I ran into with this game are a result of the game's own complexity. Whether the issues with the enemy AI or just too much going on at once, almost every problem seems to stem from the fact that Doom Eternal is running all of its processes at Mach 10. Before we get into these problems, I feel I should give a good breakdown of the game's mechanics. Almost everything from Doom 2016 carried over to Eternal, but there are some more notable differences. Other than the weapon mods getting upgrades and reworks, like the shotgun's explosive shot and burst mode changing to sticky bombs and full auto, or the heavy rifle's tactical scope being switched to the precision bolt, many new features have been added to your equipment. Grenades have been delegated to a shoulder-mounted equipment launcher, so you don't need to stop shooting in order to throw one. You have frag grenades, ice bombs, and flame belch, all of which now serve a specific purpose. The frag grenades are pretty straightforward. They're mostly there to deal damage in a crowd. They can be fully upgraded to hold 2 shots, drop cluster bombs on demons that they kill, and falter demons that they don't. This makes them the ultimate crowd control tool. The ice bomb freezes demons in place, and they can be upgraded to cause demons to take additional damage and drop health when shot. This makes them a good tactical option if you need some breathing room or are low on health. The flame belch is a flamethrower that sets demons on fire and causes them to drop armor over time or drop all the armor at once if killed. Your regular punch now does next to no damage in this game, but glory killing enemies will now charge your blood punch meter, which is much more powerful and sends a shockwave out to damage nearby enemies. The equipment in this game plays a much more active role in combat and rewards experimentation. The flame belch and ice bomb don't counteract each other's effects, so you can freeze a group of enemies, flame belch them, and drop a frag to get health, armor, and kill them all at once. This isn't even counting what you can do with certain weapon mod combinations, and the only limitation in Doom Eternal's gameplay is your imagination and carpal tunnel. Your equipment is displayed with small icons around your crosshairs as well as on the lower right hand side of your screen. I believe these changes were made after the second DLC launched, and they're a neat detail to make sure you seldom need to take your eyes off of what's in front of you. That being said, I think the icons are a little too small to be as useful as they could, and I would like if this was a fully customizable feature that allowed you to increase or decrease the size of the icons and place them wherever you want on the screen. Doom Eternal already has a lot of customization options, especially regarding the weapon wheel for consoles, so I think it would be a nice addition. I also think there should be an icon for your grenades for the people who do use this feature often, since it's the only thing that's missing. The game's upgrade system has also been reworked. Praetor suit upgrades are now much more useful, and you're now allowed to take whichever upgrade you want without having to take a prerequisite. The Argent energy cells have been replaced with Sentinel crystals that affect your flame belch and blood punch. Rune challenges have been removed, and you can now unlock whatever rune you want instead of each one being delegated to a specific runestone. All around, the upgrades in this game are much better than they were in 2016. This brings us to the gameplay, and let's go ahead and start off with exploration. The exploration in this game gets a bad rap by many critics for just about everything, especially regarding the platforming, but I don't agree with it. Not all the exploration in this game is tied to platforming, but a lot of it is, and the platforming itself isn't that bad. I will admit that the climbing sections look more than a little rigid, and the swimming sections are slower paced than the rest of the game, but most of the platforming exists to get you familiar with the game's movement. The excessive use of monkey bars in platforming pushes you to use the monkey bars in the combat arenas, which expands your movement capabilities and helps you stay in the air. They're also a more interesting way to progress through levels instead of just walking, and they're no longer overly punishing since falling off the map only takes off a little bit of health or armor. The other aspects of exploration involve finding upgrades and secret items. These can be anywhere from toys, albums, or cheat codes. The toys all represent the various enemies in the game, and the albums are songs from various different game soundtracks. The cheat codes are, well, cheat codes, but collecting all of them allows you to play the original Doom in the game's hub. You can also find codex entries scattered throughout the world which will help fill you in on the game's lore. In fact, it's the only way to understand the game's lore and the main story unless you watch a lot of Midnight videos. Exploration was also improved in this game with the inclusion of fast travel, so you don't run into the issue I did in 2016 where you can't get back to certain parts of the level. Everything about Eternal's exploration is a clear improvement over the previous game, and it's much more enjoyable as a result. I've mentioned a couple times how Doom Eternal is much faster paced than Doom 2016 was, and this can be seen in almost every area. You're given a double dash to get around the arena at a breakneck pace, you no longer need to equip the chainsaw in order to use it, and switching weapons and mods is now much faster. If you're playing on Nightmare, then the AI is as aggressive as it can be, and a few bad moves can mean a swift death. Everything about 2016's combat has been refined and overclocked, and you'll need to use every tool in order to succeed. Despite this, there are many people who think that Doom Eternal's combat was a step back from 2016's. I've seen the argument posed by many people who reviewed this game within the last year that the combat is too restrictive, and I've seen a lot of people who don't understand where this sentiment is coming from. I made it a goal to figure out why these people felt this way about the combat, and I think I understand where they're coming from. Recall how I said that Doom 2016 wasn't designed to be played by running around with a super shotgun the entire game, yet that's how everybody played it at the time because you were never punished for doing so. This isn't the case with Doom Eternal. Your ammo has been scaled back drastically compared to 2016, which more or less forces you to use your other weapons, and as long as you're doing weapon combos, then you won't be constantly running out of ammo. The first pip of your chainsaw charges over time to ensure that you always have access to ammo if you need it, so it's virtually impossible to run out so long as you're playing the game as intended. The issue lies in that phrase, playing the game as intended, because Doom Eternal does nothing to stop you from playing the game not as intended. It has done a great job at trying to inform the player how they should be playing through tutorials, but either they added many of these since I last played, or I simply didn't remember seeing them at launch. I can say that the loading screen tutorials demonstrating weapon swaps was most likely implemented after the DLC was released, because I am almost certain I never saw that one before. Regardless, if you were to ignore these tutorials, or as is often the case with me, read them and close the window without actually processing what you just read, then you'll find that there is little in the way of stopping you from playing the entire game with the wrong strategy, and effectively getting very good at being bad at the game. To the right player, this can be seen as the game punishing you for your playstyle and stopping you from playing the game how you want to play it. In that way, you can see where some people might think the combat is restrictive. I don't think this is a defensible perspective because of the fact that these people are playing the game wrong, but I do think it's an understandable perspective and maybe even a relatable one. Despite how big the Doom Eternal community is today, the fact of the matter is that almost everybody was in this situation after the game launched. How long it took you to get with the program is going to depend on you, and I'm not afraid to say that I didn't figure out how to play the game effectively until I saw how other people were playing it. This isn't a combat system that you're expected to master in one playthrough, but it is by no means restrictive. Once you learn how not to play the game, you'll find the freedom and depth lies in the things you can do while playing it correctly. Doom Eternal's combat is a game that gives you a problem and tells you to find a solution that works best for you. Each encounter is like a puzzle, and it's up to you to figure out how you deal with it effectively. You may find a tactic that works well against a single enemy, but different combination of enemies can render that strategy completely useless. There are many things you can do that aren't immediately apparent in the base game that become requirements in the DLCs, and you're given free reign to experiment with everything you have, but you will eventually be forced to experiment. There really isn't any other first-person shooter that offers the same experience as Doom Eternal, and the number of people I've heard calling for the game to be simplified to fit the standards of the genre is a bit ridiculous. So you may or may not be thinking, what does the combat consist of? Well, a lot of things. Things are more or less the same as 2016 as far as enemy variety goes, with a few new additions like Archviles, Pain Elementals, Arachnotrons, etc. Most enemies now have weak points that can be broken to falter them and disable their weapons, dealing a little bit of damage in the process. The system sort of existed in 2016, like the Mancubus stomach and Peaky's tail being the weak point, but these function more like headshot damage multipliers than actual weak points. You don't have to always disable an enemy's weak points, but I usually would just to give myself a little breathing room. It also results in a very satisfying sound that tricks my brain into thinking I did something good. In addition to these changes, you can now shoot a grenade or sticky bomb into a Cacodemon's mouth to immediately stagger it, although this takes longer than some of the weapon combos you can do in the late game. Cacodemons are much more aggressive in this game, so having a way to deal with them quickly in the early game is welcome. Levels now also include challenges called Slayer Gates. These are optional, high-octane encounters that are much more challenging than the other fights found in the level. Completing all the Slayer Gates unlocks a new weapon for you to use. There are also 2 shorter timed challenges scattered around the levels called Secret Encounters that reward you with weapon upgrade points when completed. These are similar but more difficult than the rune challenges in 2016, and they don't need to load a new area in order to be attempted. They're also another way to get you to handle tough encounters quickly, further pushing you to experiment and improve. To counteract how difficult the combat in this game can be, you can collect extra lives as you progress through the game that can prevent you from needing to reload a checkpoint when you die. Once you've reached a high enough skill level, you can try your hand at some of the master levels. These are remixes of regular levels that are much more difficult than the regular versions. I tried both the Art Complex and Super Gorness master levels, and I was only able to complete the former. It really started going crazy with the difficulty after the first DLC, and the Super Gorness master level reflects that better than anything else in the game. It's never unfair, but it is definitely very difficult, and I only got halfway through it before deciding I wasn't ready. I then gave it another shot a while later on stream, and I didn't even get that far, so yeah, that one's out of my league. The Art Complex master level is more akin to your average level in the first DLC, and I only really struggled in one area. Everything after that was much easier. I think the master levels are a great addition to the game and a great way to push your skills to their limit, although by doing so, you'll inevitably run into some of the game's problems. So I guess we better address some of those as well. I'm very aware by this point in time that I wasn't really ready to play the game on Nightmare difficulty. I'm much better now than I was before, mostly thanks to the first DLC's difficulty spike, but you're going to see in the footage that I'm nowhere near a pro at this game, even today. In some ways, this helps me identify with issues that low to mid players might run into with the game, but that also begs the question of whether these issues are specific to Nightmare difficulty or if they're also present on the lower modes. This was a difficult situation for me to be in for this video. On one hand, I don't want to unfairly criticize the game for something that stems from a lack of skill, but I also don't want to ignore these issues completely just because I feel that I have a lot of room for improvement. This starts to raise some questions that I don't have clear answers for. If you get good at staying in the air for an entire fight, does that mean that issues that happen on the ground aren't actual problems, or are you simply using the game's mechanics to avoid that problem? Can an issue that can be avoided be considered a flaw in the game's design at all? Here's my personal opinion. Just because an issue can be worked around doesn't mean that the problem doesn't exist, and anything that forces you into a very narrow list of choices because of a specific design can be considered a flaw. Or to put it another way, something can be working as intended and still be considered a bad design choice. This is a very narrow middle ground that I'll try to tread carefully, and I'll be completely upfront about things that may not be problems but could still use room for improvement. Let's start off with some more evident issues with the game. There are many problems that I'm aware that this game has that I didn't personally experience. Things like enemy ground attacks following you in the air are a big one. For those of you listening to this instead of watching it, a ground attack in Doom Eternal is when an enemy sends a projectile at you that is meant to remain on the ground. There's a bug that can cause these attacks to follow you into the air when they shouldn't be able to. I've also had the problem of enemies just shrugging off an ice bomb like nothing happened. At first I thought my aim was off, but I got enough examples to prove that enemies can sometimes resist the effects of an ice bomb in some circumstances. I'm not entirely sure why this happens, but it's really annoying during an intense fight. Other known issues are the chainsaw giving a no target message when right in front of an enemy, and this is another problem that I don't have footage of, but many people within the Doom community can confirm to be true. Something I noticed that is similar to this issue is the Super Shotgun's meat hook not always wanting to acquire a target, and it's the most noticeable on fodder enemies and pain elementals. From what I understand, this only seems to be a problem on console, likely because trying to aim with a controller isn't as precise as a mouse and keyboard. I think there's a sweet spot for the meat hook to acquire a target that's more difficult to line up on a moving target with the controller. Once you get used to this, you can get a little better at it, but there are still some times that I would be aiming straight at a pain elemental and the meat hook would either fail to find a lock-on point or continuously lose that lock-on when it found it. If I were to take a guess, I would say that it has something to do with the lost souls interfering with the meat hook's lock-on. I think this issue is more related to a broader problem with the behind-the-scenes lock-on effects in this game. If the chainsaw also has a hidden lock-on effect that is similar to the meat hooks, then it might sometimes fail whenever you try to chainsaw a demon, resulting in the no target message. There are two other pieces of evidence that I feel support this theory. Sometimes when I was using the rocket launcher's lock-on effect, it would fail to actually lock on to the enemy I'm aiming at. This happened the most frequently if the enemy was facing sideways, although it would sometimes happen whenever it felt like it. Once I realized this was happening, I started to notice the issue more frequently. The other example I have is another known issue, glory kills not activating and causing you to punch the enemy instead. If you had a blood punch stored, then this is going to be a slight annoyance, but if you didn't, then this would leave you open to receive a load of damage you weren't prepared for. At first glance, these four issues aren't related, but if you take a closer look, then you'll realize that they all have one thing in common: targeting. What I can say with certainty is that this behind-the-scenes lock-on effect definitely happens. It just may not have the same effect for any one of these mechanics. The meat hook is an active search for something to grab onto, while the glory kills and chainsaw seem to be a more immediate effect. I think that these are just different variations of the same programming working in different ways, and whenever this program fails, you can see it in any one of these 4 areas. I highly urge you to pay attention to the times that your meat hook and microwave beam doesn't target properly, or when you try to use lock-on rockets and the game targets a random fodder demon that wasn't even close to the center of your cursor. It's also possible that the lock-on effect itself is working fine, but the demon the game is trying to lock onto is the issue. Another potential cause could be this indicator lagging as it tries to keep up with everything happening, and by the time it locks onto the demon you're looking at, you've already wasted your blood punch. It's possible that I'm completely wrong with this theory, but I feel extremely confident in it. I've had too many targeting issues across too many weapons to not believe this is the core problem. Moving on from some more evident issues with the game, let's move into something a little less certain. This issue is one that could be perceived as an intentional design in the game, and I regard it as more of a jagged edge to the experience than anything else. The most prominent one that I've encountered involves you getting body blocked during a glory kill or a chainsaw. To explain the issue in more detail, there's nothing to stop other demons from rushing straight up to you while you're chainsawing or performing a glory kill, which can result in you taking near unavoidable damage the second the animation finished. This was the most common problem I had with the game's combat, and it can be very frustrating depending on the circumstance. There are several things going into this that make it as bad as it currently is. First off, the chainsaw animation is much longer than it was in Doom 2016, which only gives the enemy more time to approach you and deal damage the second you're finished. The fact that you have a lower ammo pool also means you'll be chainsawing more often than you did in 2016, which only further increases the chances of this happening. Locking the player into an animation and then hitting them the second it's finished is unfair and overly punishing, not to mention just plain frustrating. The thing is, there are ways that you can avoid this. Your positioning plays a big role in how prominent this issue is, and you shouldn't be launching into a glory kill in the middle of a group of enemies to begin with. Additionally, you can drop grenades before or after you do this to falter enemies and give you some breathing room, although you can't glory kill frozen enemies. There's also a rune that gives you a speed boost after performing a glory kill, which I always use specifically to avoid circumstances like this. The only time this doesn't work is when you're going against possessed or buffed enemies, since they also receive a speed boost. So this brings me back to that question. Can this be considered a problem if there are ways that you can avoid it? I'm going to say yes for one reason. It conflicts with other design choices. The general consensus is that the chainsaw animation is longer in this game because it's meant to give you a moment to breathe in the midst of a tough battle. But if this is the case, then why are enemies still allowed to get right in your face and immediately slam you with damage? If you disagree with me and think this is a non-issue, then let me ask you this. Do you think eliminating some potentially unfair moments from the game would negatively impact the experience? Wouldn't you agree that smoothing out these rougher edges only serves to make the experience a little more polished? How you feel about this issue is going to depend heavily on your experience. One of the worst examples I have of this comes from a moment in the second DLC. There's a part on Reclaimed Earth where you're put in a confined space with a Mancubus and a possessed Pinky. Possessed enemies have increased speed, damage resistance, and cannot be frozen by ice bombs or faltered. I first got body blocked by the Pinky and a soldier and died because I couldn't move. I then started focusing the Mancubus down and went for the glory kill because I was low on health and wanted it dead. The second I got out of the glory kill, I got hit by the Pinky and lost my second extra life. You don't regain extra lives by reloading checkpoints, so I had to take the loss and move on. This was a moment where the mistakes I made ultimately put me at low health, but that killing blow was of no fault of my own. I think a simple solution to this problem would be a half second of invincibility frames after chainsawing and performing a glory kill. This is just enough to give you some breathing room, but not enough to abuse. This would remove moments of frustration like that one and would have allowed me to properly react. There are a few more issues I have with Doom Eternal, but most of them are involving specific bosses, so I'll be discussing those at that point in the story. I mean, I have to do something to keep you here, don't I? On that note, let's go ahead and get into it. Doom Eternal's campaign is going to make very little sense to people who haven't familiarized themselves with Doom lore. Considering that almost every plot-related detail is in the codex, and you need to find all the entries before you can read it, it's impossible to say that this wasn't intentional. I think the story is a great backdrop of the gameplay and allows you to go through several interesting locations, but I still feel like it could have worked harder to make a more coherent plot for players who mostly focus on the gameplay but could still appreciate a simple story that wasn't so difficult to understand. The most confusing mission in Doom 2016 was the last one, but even if you don't understand what the well is, you could understand that shutting it down would close the portal on Mars. I'll give a brief example to help you understand what I mean. The first mission shows you on a giant floating castle in the middle of space. You're teleported somewhere, and after completing a single combat arena, you then start killing one of the Hell Priests. The Slayer presents some sort of token that makes the priest freak out, and then you get some imagery as you kill him. Vega tells you that killing the priest reduced the demonic consumption of Earth, then you proceed through the level. You make it to the end where there's a gathering of 2 more Hell Priests and an entity called the Con Maker. Vega tells you that the Con Maker cannot be killed outside of her domain, and you learn from the Hell Priest taunts that there's an active demonic invasion of Earth, just in case the rest of the level wasn't a dead giveaway. You scare off the priest, and the Con Maker makes some comments about how you used to work for her, and then you enter the teleporter and leave. Hopefully you can see the problem. The first level of the game creates more questions than the most confusing level of 2016, and many of them aren't answered throughout the course of the game if you don't read the codex. Questions like, what is this giant castle and how did the Slayer find it? What happened since the ending of the last game? Who were the Hell Priests? Who was the Con Maker? How were the priests tied to the demonic invasion of Earth? Why didn't the Slayer kill them outright if they were so dangerous? If you guessed he didn't attack because the Hell Priests each have a champion that must be killed before their plot armor is removed, I mean their soul is now unguarded, then you are better at understanding the vague context clues given than I am. Throughout the story, you're constantly introduced to people and concepts that you never receive an explanation for. That's not to say that everything needs to be meticulously laid out, but some general guidance wouldn't hurt either. It gives off the impression that the player character knows more about what's going on than the player, and it makes it hard for the player to care at all. At first glance, this can be interpreted as a good thing. If the player doesn't care about the story, then they can spend more time focusing on the gameplay, which is the main attraction. The issue here is that by making the player fail to care about the story, they'll never take the time to understand the lore, which is only going to cause more confusion during the DLCs. There's still the chance that a lack of explanation will be enough incentive for people to read the codex to figure out what's going on, which is what happened to me. Still, it needs to be said that delegating crucial plot points to a collectible has never been something I care for. So how much of a problem is this? Honestly, not much. I don't think this is a crucial flaw of the game and that it should put more focus on the game's story, but it's also worth mentioning that they did a far better job balancing the story and gameplay in 2016. I can already see the comments telling me that the story in a Doom game isn't important and that I'm making a much bigger deal out of this than it really is, but I don't think that's necessarily true. Understand that I'm not saying Doom Eternal is a lesser game because of these issues, rather that the handling of the story could have been done a little better and has already been done better in the previous game. On that note, let's go ahead and get into the game's story, starting with a more detailed walkthrough of the game's beginning. The game begins as I described a moment ago. You can see from the space that Earth is being raised by the demons. Then you catch a glimpse of a giant floating castle. This is the Fortress of Doom, and it acts as your hub in between missions. You hear in the cutscene that 60% of Earth has already fallen to the demons and has been consumed by Hell. You get a cool look at your new arm blade, then you teleport to the Hell Barge and kill the first Hell Priest. This is also where you get your first tutorials, which means it's time to address the problem with how they're presented. After picking up the chainsaw, you're teleported to a room where you're made to try it out. This is something you do for most of your equipment and even some platforming mechanics in the second DLC. This is also why I played Doom 2016 on Ultraviolence to see how tutorials were handled there, only to learn that there were hardly any. I understand its intention here of forcing you to test a feature that you might otherwise ignore, but I can't help but feel this holds my hand a little too excessively for a game that is generally pretty vague with its advanced mechanics. I felt this way the first time that I played, and I don't see why a pop-up message couldn't have sufficed here. What's even weirder is that the Glory Kill tutorial right before it doesn't do this, and you're put in a combat encounter immediately afterwards where you'll be forced to use it anyways due to your low ammo pool. You proceed through the mission, acquiring the heavy cannon and frag grenades. You then make it to the Hell Priest gathering where you meet the Con Maker, and then you leave. I already explained this earlier, so I don't feel the need to repeat it here. Once you're back at the fortress, Vega tells you that he can't locate the second Hell Priest because your celestial locator is missing a component, so you'll need to find a new one. You then get the Flame Belch and make your way to a place called Exultia, which is the city of the Night Sentinels. You fight your way through, acquiring both the Blood Punch and Double Dash along the way, until you come to King Novik's throne room. His ghost tells you that killing the Hell Priest is forbidden, despite their crimes, because they are still of Sentinel blood. He then tells you that stopping the demonic invasion will cause more harm than good, and then you leave with your celestial locator. You then take a portal to Hell where you'll be introduced to every games journalist's nightmare, Purple Sludge. This slows your movement speed to a crawl and prevents you from jumping and dashing while you're in it. I always found it strange how many people criticize this game just for the inclusion of Purple Sludge, because it's really not a big deal. 99% of it can be bypassed with some creative platforming tactics, like meat hooking an enemy to stay in the air, with the only mandatory Purple Sludge section being in this level where you need to fight an Arachnotron within it. This is also simple, since all it takes is a sticky bomb or precision bolt shot to take out its turret, and then you just shoot it until it's dead. The sludge in this game teaches you that the ground isn't always the safest place to be, which will be expanded upon later in the game with the inclusion of damage zones on the floor. You make your way through the level until you reach a Night Sentinel called the Betrayer. He had apparently told you and everybody else to leave him in hell, claiming it's where he belongs. You hand him the Celestial Locator so he can do something to it, then he chastises you for fighting the Con Maker in order to save Earth. He also tells you to lay somebody's heart to rest and throws you an object. From here, you fight your way out of Hell and back to the fortress. Vega tells you that Santa Claus is harboring the second Hell Priest in the North Pole, proving once again that communists can't be trusted. You're also given a brief tutorial about the hub by using a Sentinel battery, one of the items you collect in levels, to restore power to the ship, then head down to the Ripitorium to kill some demons. This area serves as the ship's prison where you quote-unquote punish the demons you capture from previous levels. It's basically just an optional combat encounter for you to practice your combat abilities. There's no penalty for dying inside this area, and it's a nice way to hone your skills. I do think that the concept is a little underexplored, because you're not allowed to practice as many times as you want or modify the enemies that you encounter. This has the potential to be a fully customizable feature that lets you control how you practice. You could toggle which demons you want to spawn in the fight, how many can be on the field at one time, or put them on a timer to continue spawning so you can practice ways to take care of them quickly or risk fighting multiples of them at once. You could also have a general timer that determines how long the fight will last, or if you want the fight to go on until you decide to end it. I think the arena should be customizable as well, letting you choose from a list of major combat encounters you've already completed throughout the game. This would be a cool way of letting you practice for an Ultra Nightmare run by giving you arena presets that reconstruct that specific fight, or letting you customize it however you want. I think this feature is missing a mountain of potential that id could capitalize on to give console and unmodded PC players the opportunity to experiment with different combinations of demons and learn how to face them effectively, or create intentionally unfair encounters like those seen in the randomizer mods available in the Nexus. I would understand this not being the case if Doom Eternal had a SnapMap feature, but as it stands it currently doesn't. The Ripitorium as it is now is little more than a nice mini-game between levels that I never felt really pushed me to be better than I was at the moment. Moving on, you make your way back to the teleporter and head to the next level, Cultist Base. This level is pretty straightforward and mostly consists of combat arenas, with the only notable part being when you take control of a Revenant to get your super shotgun. This basically serves as a mandatory plug for the game's multiplayer since the demons are playable in battle mode. The next level, Doom Hunter Base, is the complete opposite, only having one real combat encounter with the rest being skirmishes that take place between platforming. You get to watch as the Hell Priest manufactures the boss of the level, the Doom Hunter. This boss isn't very easy at this stage of the game, but it's still manageable. The body is invulnerable when its shields are up, but you can lower its shields by sustaining fire with the plasma rifle. Using the microwave beam mod is faster, but you'll be stuck with a movement penalty while it works. Alternatively, you can target its unshielded sled to bypass this altogether, with it being most susceptible to blood punches if you can safely get close enough. After doing enough damage, it'll detach from its sled and can be easily finished off with lock-on rockets. Once you kill it, you jump down to fight 2 more of them, and you'll be fighting many more than these throughout the course of the game. After killing the rest of them, the Hell Priest tries to bargain with you to save his life. You respond by cutting off his head and dropping another Chuck E. Cheese token on his body like the one seen in the first level. The Con Maker is unhappy that you keep killing the Hell Priest, so she hacks your ship and tells you that she's moving the final one to a secure location and ramping up the consumption of Earth. You need to head to the source of the invasion and destroy the Super Gore Nest to further halt the demon's progress. You then get the absolute best objective in the entire game: acquire the Ballista. This next mission is yet another level that is mostly just combat with very little to remark on. You arrive, restart the facility's main generator, then escape in the easiest time section in video game history. Vega tells you that you'll need help finding the final Hell Priest, and he suggests going to Samuel Hayden. You teleport to the headquarters of Earth's main resistance force, the Ark. This next level is one of my personal favorites. You fight your way to the main facility as it's being assaulted by the demons, but 2 giant tentacles are blocking the way to the entrance. As you fight through the level, you'll find various audio logs from a Dr. Elena Richardson, who explains her research into your physiology. Over the course of the logs, she slowly starts to view you as a god before joining the Slayer's personal cult. You fight your way to some nearby turrets to destroy the tentacles, although the game doesn't let you actually fire them yourself. I'd be lying if I said this didn't disappoint me when I first played this game. After making it to the the Ark facility, you see that they've been studying the Crucible from the last game, so you take it before proceeding to Samuel Hayden. He's missing half of his robot body and is close to dead. After gently removing him from his life support system, you're greeted to everybody's favorite enemy, the Marauder. You knew this discussion was coming. Let's talk about the Marauder. This single enemy proves more than anything how quick people are to call something broken without actually taking a step back and learning how to deal with it. I'm guilty of this myself, but time has proven just how wrong everybody was. In hindsight, I believe the misconceptions about this enemy lie in the game's tutorial message. The Marauder is a defensive powerhouse. Stand too close, he uses his shotgun. Stand too far away, he throws his projectile. Keep him at mid-range, counter his attacks when his eyes flash green to daze him, otherwise he blocks your shots. This tutorial message is different than the one at launch, omitting the portion where it says that the Marauder is resistant to super weapons, and adding the words to daze him so players know he's susceptible to follow-up damage. When I and many others read the tutorial message, it left the impression that there's a Goldilocks zone that you must be in if you want to damage the Marauder, and that there was no way to proactively engage him. If you shoot the Marauder when his shield is up, then he'll summon a flaming dog that will chase you around the map until killed. This can also happen if he blocks incoming fire from other demons. A large amount of the negative reception that the Marauder received was mostly because of the tutorial's misleading text, which is much better today than it was at launch. You don't need to be at long range for the Marauder to throw his projectile at you, and you don't need to stand still at mid-range in order to open him to an attack. Most of the time, the Marauder will charge you and go for an attack regardless of where you're standing. It also wasn't known that you can shoot around his shield with the rocket launcher's remote detonation or shooting sticky bombs around him. The text claiming he's resistant to super weapons was also misleading since a BFG shot can still kill him if you hit him when he is dazed. I think the current tutorial message is much more comprehensive, although some experimentation will still be required for new players. The Marauder today has one or two issues that came from various patches, although I can't be sure which one caused them. I think it came with the second DLC patch, which added a visual for when the Marauder is dazed, but I can't say for certain. The first issue is with his spin attack, which has much more reach than it looks like it should. This can also be seen with his vertical strike, but it's especially noticeable with the spin attack. I'm not sure if this is a bug that is extending the range of this attack or if it just looks off visually, but it definitely doesn't feel right. It's like his axe gets bigger in the midst of the swing. This likely was introduced after the second DLC because the final boss there has the same issue with his attacks. The second issue is one I've caught glimpses of but didn't experience enough times to really call a problem. The Marauder sometimes feels like it shrugs off damage that would have otherwise dazed it. I think this is a circumstantial problem since I would try to falter him by getting around his shield, but I was never able to make it work. I do know that they made some changes to the Marauder and how his falters work, so this appears to be an increase in the damage threshold that triggers the daze rather than a bug of sorts. This would also explain why the splash damage from a ballista and remote detonated rocket doesn't seem to have as strong of an effect as they used to. I wonder if this change was made because you can extend the Marauder's daze with the Sentinel Hammer in the second DLC, and being able to falter and daze him repeatedly made things too easy. This would be an understandable decision, but it does make things significantly more difficult in the base game. I suppose it's better to keep things consistent between the two, and having a lower falter threshold in the base game would cause confusion and even frustration in the DLC, but this problem combined with their weird spin attack issue can make Marauders a pain in the ass sometimes. Moving on, you kill the Marauder and head back to the fortress where Samuel integrates with your ship's mainframe. He tells you that the final Hell Priest is hiding somewhere called Sentinel Prime, and that the only functional slipgate there is buried in the core of Mars. There are no known pathways to the slipgate, so we're going to make one. You do the E3 trailer, except with different voice actors for some reason, take a man's plasma rifle as a show of force, then fight your way to the BFG 10,000. Once you relieve a soldier of his post, you are once again denied the right to play with the big toys and have to watch a cutscene as the Slayer shoots a gaping hole in the center of Mars. You then fight your way to the escape pods and get inside the crater and take the teleporter to Sentinel Prime. Once you're there, you're greeted by the Night Sentinels and Makers alike. You'll see various cutscenes that show the Slayer being brought to the Hell Priest before they were corrupted, and you can see that the armor he's wearing matches the original Doom Guy outfit. He also rambles on about the demons before being sent to the arena. As you proceed through the level, the Con Maker tries to bargain with you, promising to restore what the demons took from you if you'll turn back and leave the Hell Priest alive. Other than some codex entries, there's not really anything worth noting about this level until the end of it. Once you've reached the final elevator, you get another flashback to the Slayer in the arena, still rambling about the demons. The Con Maker wants to learn more about them, then you cut back to the present where the Hell Priest warns you that killing him will cause you to lose all sovereignty in Sentinel Prime. You're then greeted by the next boss, the Gladiator. This boss is pretty straightforward. The gladiator uses his shield in the first stage of the fight, then you need to wait for his eyes to flash green before attacking. If you deal enough damage quick enough, usually requiring a precision bolt or ballista shot, then you'll stagger it and gain the opportunity to run up and glory kill it for some extra damage. It's important to note that the gladiator can't be damaged by your regular weapons while staggered. After you take care of its first phase, you destroy its shield with your arm blade and move on to phase 2. The gladiator will pull out a second flail it can attack with and gains the ability to deflect shots back at you when spinning one of them like Bentley from Spyro 3. Despite this, the second phase is much more proactive as the gladiator becomes more aggressive but leaves you with more opportunities to attack. Occasionally, it'll wall you in with its flails and send damage waves at you, similar to what the Cyber Demon does in 2016 but much more difficult to dodge. It's also immune to damage at this phase, so you can't just delete it with lock-on rockets. Whenever it's finished, you're given another opportunity to stagger it for some extra damage, but there's a persistent bug I've encountered every time I fought it where it only works the first time you do it. Every other time, you'll be slammed with damage. If this isn't a bug, and instead is a design choice, then it's very inconsistent with the rest of the fight since its eyes continue to flash green when it happens. If you do encounter this issue, then you can just dodge its charge since the flails no longer block you in. If this boss sounds easy, don't worry, it isn't. He can predict your movement surprisingly well and throw his flail to intersect with you if you're not careful. His attacks are fast and do a lot of damage, and I remember this fight giving me a ton of trouble my first time through. I've beaten this boss more times than I've actually completed the game just because I wanted to stop dying to it, so that shows in my gameplay. Once it's dead, you gain another blue token and kill the Hell Priest, causing all the Night Sentinels to become hostile. You escape through the portal and return to your ship. Once you're back at the fortress, you find that it's been disabled by the con maker. She's decided that you've killed enough of her husbandos and it's time to do what she could have done at the very beginning of the game, but if she did, we wouldn't have a plot. She plans to resurrect the Icon of Sin and finish the culling while you're trapped in the fortress. She then sends a whole whopping 10 fodder demons to stop you, which I immediately underestimate by soaking up damage while charging a destroyer blade that I didn't actually hit anything with. Once you've dealt with the easiest fight in the game, you use the demonic crucible to restore power to your ship. You're then informed that you need a Slayer's Crucible in order to kill a Titan, so you set your course for Terras Nabad, the fallen Sentinel city where the legend of the Doomslayer began. Terras Nabad is where the game ramps up its difficulty. It contains the final Slayer Gate, several fights against the Archvile and Marauder, and the dreaded swimming section that stands as the only platforming in the game without any real purpose beyond variety. Still, I think it's a very fun level with some of the more creative exploration mechanics like destroying statues to reveal hidden buttons. It's also where you can start finding mastery tokens to bypass the challenges for weapon mods you don't plan on completing. The only moment worth noting is a flashback to when somebody called the Seraphim uses a large machine to give the Slayer additional powers to fight the demons. Other than that, you mostly make your way to where you last left your Crucible. You can't remove your Crucible blade from a Titan or it'll come back to life, so you break off the hilt and make your way to the armory to recharge your Master Sword. Once you do, you're given a chance to test it out, so let's talk about the Crucible. You have 3 charges to use, and it will instant kill anything except a Marauder. Even if you've already dazed a Marauder, it won't die to the Crucible, which is weird because it seems like the one weapon that should be able to counter its shield considering they're both running on Argent Energy. What's even stranger is that the Crucible does work if the Marauder is staggered. What's even stranger still is if you do try to use the Crucible against a Marauder, then the hit registers as a blood punch. Let's add that to the list of things I can't explain about this game. Once you've returned to your ship, you're told to grab any final upgrades you need because you won't be returning until the job is done. If you've done all the Slayer Gates, which I did just for this video, you can get access to the Unmaker, which is one of the most underwhelming super weapons in the game. It's nowhere near as powerful as the BFG as far as raw AoE is concerned, but it is more economical to use with weapon combos for those who aren't stingy with their super weapon ammo like I am. I've personally never gotten much use out of the thing, but there's a strong sect of the community who swear by it. I think it needs a slight buff to make it more viable, but I'm sure there's a technique to it that I'm missing or just doesn't fit my playstyle. From this point, you go to Necroval, the City of the Damned. This region makes up 2 levels, and I hope you'll forgive me for not having a lot to say about it. Samuel gives some exposition about how the soul is tortured and twisted into Argent Energy, which gives much more context as to why the Slayer was so adamant about destroying it in 2016. Even if he didn't know exactly how it was done, he probably knew that it contained people's souls. You also learn how the facility was built in secret without the Night Sentinel's knowledge, and it's a result of a bargain between the Conmaker and the Dark Lord of Hell. The Conmaker's race is dying, and they need the Argent Energy to prolong their life for complicated reasons we'll get into later. Once you've made it to the top of the tower, you use the Argent Stream to travel to the home of the Makers, Urdak. This next level has more going on than the last two. Urdak has the platforming gimmick of jumping through giant rings like Superman 64 in order to boost yourself to the next platform. You make it to the Con Maker where she's attempting to awaken the Icon of Sin. You use the thing that the Betrayer gave you in the beginning of the game, which turns out to be an Argent Dagger, and stab the heart to prevent the ritual. This causes the Con Maker to lose control of the Megazord, and the nearby Makers are now under Hell's influence. I introduce you to the Maker Drone, the best enemy in the game. I used to have nothing but trouble with these little guys, but now that I don't suck buffalo ass at this game, I've come to love them. The Maker Drones are walking pinatas, and headshotting one with a powerful enough weapon will cause them to give you full health and ammo. This means that so long as one is nearby and you know how to do MLG quickscopes with your precision bolt, then you're basically invincible. There are several creative ways to take care of a Maker Drone. Quickscoping with a precision bolt is the easiest since you don't actually need to aim in with the weapon. You're basically just lining up the hipfire reticle and tapping the aim button before shooting. If you haven't included the heavy cannon in your playstyle, then you can also hit them with a sticky bomb or a ballista shot. If all else fails, you can meat hook them and barrel stuff your super shotgun in their face, which does the job surprisingly well. If you can't manage any of that, I suggest going to IGN's website, clicking on the Careers tab, and applying for a position as a journalist. I'd recommend getting very familiar with the Maker Drones throughout this level because it will be life or death by the end of it. This level has you uploading Vega to Urdak's systems in order to open a portal back to Earth and stop the Icon of Sin from destroying the planet. Vega mentions something about him being the father, which is something else we'll talk about later on. Once you've gotten through all the encounters and opened the portal, you confront the Con Maker. Samuel says that she can't die so long as the orb is in her chest, and you get ready to fight. The difficulty of this boss is heavily dependent on your ability to effectively kill Maker Drones. There are very few armor and health pickups in this arena, and no fodder enemies to chainsaw. The Con Maker herself will throw projectiles at you and summon the Archimedes 2 orbital space laser to attack you with. She'll also create damage zones on the ground that you'll need to watch out for. If you go too long without attacking her, then she can regain her health. She has 6 health bars in total. The last time I did this boss fight before this recording session, I was streaming the game, and it took me over an hour to complete because I didn't know what I was doing. On this attempt, it took me one try in less than 3 minutes to finish, and when I streamed the game after this recording session, it took me a minute and a half, and I was talking to chat the entire time. The only reason it took me over an hour last time is because I didn't know how to kill the Maker Drones to restock my health, which just goes to show how useful they are as an enemy. If you really want to take care of the Con Maker quickly, 2 lock-on bursts with a rocket launcher and 1 super shotgun shot will absolutely demolish her health bar. Once the Con Maker is dead, you get to see what she looks like under the armor, a floating Cthulhan abomination. She then dies before the orb leaves her chest, proving that Samuel Hayden doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. And then this happens. Keep the Darth Vader scream in mind, I'll be bringing it back up later. You travel through the portal and make your way back to Earth, thus beginning the last mission, Final Sin. This mission is a long chain of longer combat encounters building up to your fight with the Icon of Sin. Just getting to the boss took me about 40 minutes to do, although I learned during my last stream that one of the fights can be skipped entirely by using the meat hook to boost yourself to the ledge. Once you're ready, you confront the big boy himself. The Icon of Sin's boss fight is pretty straightforward, but I've said that about every boss in this game. Destroy his 8 armor pieces to progress to the next phase, then destroy his 8 body parts to finish the fight. As you're doing this, you need to watch out for his attacks and the demons he summons. There are several crucible charges and ammo pickups littered around, and I found most of the demons pretty easy to avoid. Some parts can be hard to hit, like the Icon's forearm, but overall, it's not too terribly difficult as long as you're familiar with his attacks and don't accidentally do this. I was a little disappointed with this fight the first time I did it because I expected to repair and use the mech suit that you see in the Fortress of Doom, but now that I realize this is just a remaster of the Icon of Sin fight from Doom 2, I'm a little more positive about it. Once you've taken out all his limbs, you climb to his head and impale him with the crucible, then once again break the hilt off the blade to make sure it never rises again. You then walk away as King Novik finishes the monologue he started in the intro, and that's the end of the base game. So I'm sure those of you who never played this game are thinking, what the hell was even going on? Well, thankfully for you, I've set aside this portion of the video to answer just that. I feel knowledgeable enough in Doom lore to give a concise summary to help understand the events of the game, but this isn't going to be a deep analysis of everything Doom. All of my information is going to come from the codex with only a handful of exceptions, so I guess we should get into it. Doom lore is interesting to me for multiple reasons, but the biggest one is the maturity of how it handles its themes. Some of you who are watching have probably picked up on a few details that intersect or hint to various religious beliefs. The Makers are meant to represent the angels, and Urdak, according to the Codex, literally translates to heaven or paradise from the language of Argent D'Nur. On top of this, the leader of the Makers and the alleged creator of the universe is called the Father. The demons, obviously, represent hell, where the souls of the damned are tortured and refined into Argent energy. There's a lot of dialogue that hints towards this being a form of apocalypse that is lined out in most Abrahamic beliefs, and anybody who's familiar with those beliefs is likely going to see the similarities. Despite this, not everything is a one-to-one translation from Bible to Doom Bible, and you can see many aspects of the universe that is wholly original, such as Argent D'Nur and the Night Sentinels. Instead of breaking down every parallel between Doom lore and religion, I'll get straight to the point. It created a sci-fi universe that borrows many Abrahamic religious concepts without ever actually taking a stance on religion as a whole, and you have to respect their ability to do that. It seems like anytime the gaming or film industry tries to depict religion, they always represent them with radical, mindless, almost cult-like behavior, as if one of the requirements for becoming a member of your local church is to throw your brain in the nearest dumpster. In fact, I remember recently seeing an episode of an otherwise decent show where a group of Christians actually torture and kill an innocent man trying to exorcise the devil from him. And that's secondary to the number of crazy religious factions in video games that try to kill you on sight. I have to respect id for not using the Doom franchise as a platform to preach to you about the dangers of organized religion, even if there are some areas where this can be seen, and even in those areas, it's mostly there to establish the Makers as an antagonist in the universe. The demonic and Slayer cults both come off more as sports fans offering blood sacrifices for their team to win, and they don't explore the concept enough to be considered taking a stance against religion. For the most part, Doom lore is about the extra-dimensional factions trying to disrupt everybody's afternoon picnic, and the one pissed-off meathead who decided to do something about it. I'd also like to specify that I don't think Doom lore is good because it refuses to take a stance on difficult subjects like religion and religious indoctrination. I just appreciate that it didn't oversimplify the universe by underexploring the subject. Or to put it a better way, if you're going to talk about the futility of revenge, then you need to actually discuss the nuance involved. Fuck, I'm talking about The Last of Us 2 again. Doom 2016 and Eternal are direct sequels to the original Doom, Doom 2, and Doom 64. 2016 is an original reimagining of the events of the first Doom, and Eternal is that for Doom 2, hence the rematches against the original bosses like the Spider Mastermind and Icon of Sin. The first Doom game follows an unnamed space marine, referred to as the Doom Marine before he was the Doom Slayer, after he gets sent to a facility on Mars after he attacked his commanding officer for ordering him to fire on civilians. The officer is very lucky that he didn't have his powers yet, or that probably would have turned his spinal column into dust. The UAC was testing new teleportation technology that goes horribly wrong and opens a portal to Hell. The Marine fights his way through various bases until he finds himself inside Hell, where he kills the Spider Mastermind. By the time he gets back to Earth, he finds his pet rabbit's head on a pike as the demons begin their invasion. The rabbit, Daisy, can actually be seen in every level of Doom Eternal and have been confirmed by Hugo Martin as hallucinations by the Slayer. This is both an Easter egg and an actual motivation for the Slayer to kill every demon alive. It sounds childish and petty, but the original games weren't there to take things seriously. I'm actually fairly certain that the Slayer lost his family during the invasion of Earth, but that wasn't listed on Wikipedia, and if it's not in the archives, then it doesn't exist. Doom 2 has the Marine fighting to help Earth evacuate into space, leaving him as the only person left on the planet. He then fights his way into Hell in order to close the portal and defeats the Icon of Sin, which seemingly destroys Hell altogether, but as we know, that's not what happens. He then makes his way back home, having saved Earth from the invasion. Doom 64 has the Marine getting back to work after something is found hiding on an abandoned UAC installation. In the time before it was discovered, it had resurrected the demons. The Marine is lured into Hell and kills the mother demon with the Unmaker, although the incident left the Marine unable to live a normal life, so he chose to remain in Hell forever. A few events happen before Doom 2016 that are revealed in Eternal. Sometime during the Marine's time in Hell, he ends up in Sentinel Prime, likely due to some dimensional portal that brought him there. The history of Argent D'Nur and the Night Sentinels is long and only interesting if you're already invested in the lore, so I'll only interject some details to add context to what's going on. For starters, Sentinel tradition requires that prisoners and criminals are given the chance to regain their honor by competing in the arena, and those successful few are sent to the front lines of the Sentinel army to die in battle. As an unknown outlander, the Marine was sent to the arena where he quickly defeated all of his opponents while raving about the demons. You can tell from these cutscenes that his time in hell has left him on the brink of insanity. The Conmaker wants to know more about the demons, and she thinks it's another race of people that she can enlighten, and the Marine is sent to the front lines. The Marine outlived every other arena champion in Argenta history and survived long enough to see the arrival of the demons. The arrival of the demons also brought the discovery of Hell energy, which the Hell Priest, formerly known as the TAG, would research in hopes of creating something to aid the Sentinels in battle. It was also through this energy that the Makers could avoid a biological degeneration they call the Transfiguration. As the battles went on, King Novik caught wind of the Marine's feats in battle and recruited him into the Knight Sentinels, which was the first break of their traditions. This is where the Marine would receive additional training and knowledge of the Sentinel way of life, and eventually they started making excursions into Hell itself. Eventually, Terras Nabad was sacked by the demons in a massive invasion with the aid of a Titan. The Marine was the only person to really hold his ground during the invasion, and he was eventually taken away by the Seraphim to empower him with the Divinity Machine, essentially turning him into a demigod. This was a device created to purify the Sentinels, who were suspected to be the prophesied destroyer of the Makers, which usually resulted in the candidate's death. The Marine then uses his newfound power to defeat the Titan and become known as the Doomslayer. It was during the greater excursions into Hell that the Sentinels discovered Necroval in the Foundry, which, as Samuel Hayden explained earlier, was built in secret after the Conmaker made a deal with the Dark Lord for more Argent energy. The Argenta had been consuming and becoming addicted to Argent energy since it could be used to heal them and perform miracles, with only the Knight Sentinels themselves not partaking in it. Once they learned that Argent energy was made from tortured Sentinel souls, they rejected the Conmaker and returned to their former tools empowered by other godlike creatures called the Elemental Wraiths. The general public back in Argent Denur didn't believe that the Foundry even existed and killed those spreading the news for being heretics. There was a schism in the ranks of the Knight Sentinels between those who would side with the Makers, who would become the Marauders, and those who would side with Novik, becoming the remaining Sentinels. The Daag sided with Novik while secretly working for the Conmaker. The Daag then proposed a plan to end the civil war. They approached Commander Valen, one of the high-ranking Sentinels whose son had died in battle to the demons, and promised to resurrect him if he would lead them to the Elemental Wraiths so they could be corrupted. Valen agreed, and what resulted was the creation of the Well, the same well that you shut down at the end of Doom 2016. This is the only Codex entry in 2016 that makes a reference to the greater lore of the Argenta. After they corrupted the Wraiths, the Hell Priest resurrected Valen's son as the icon of sin. I believe this is a different incarnation than the one seen in Doom 2, unless this is meant to imply that there's some multiverse shenanigans going on here. Hugo Martin seems pretty reluctant to dabble in that topic, so I'm just going to say that they used Valen's son's soul to recreate the icon. While this was going on, Novik was deceived by the priest into sending all of the Sentinels' veterans, led by the Slayer, to destroy the Foundry and end the Civil War. Once they entered, they were sealed from the other side and trapped in Hell. The only survivors were the Slayer and Valen, who became known as the Betrayer. Novik ultimately lost the Civil War, and Argent Denur became a twisted society dependent on Argent energy and the Makers to survive. Most of this information is given from the Slayer Testaments in Doom 2016, but it's much more cryptic and lighter on details. Those testaments do reveal that the Slayer continued his conquest against the demons until he was trapped in the sarcophagus, then released by Samuel Hayden after Olivia released the Hellwave on Mars. There are many more details outlined in the Codex, such as the exact process of soul extraction, how Hell's victims are transformed into demons, and the early days of Argent Denur's history. The DLC would retcon, expand, and then retcon again most of the history regarding the Makers in Hell's world, although I think these changes are necessary for the greater lore, even if it results in some pretty big cliches. I won't be giving as much explanation about the DLC codexes, but I will touch on them when we get there. Hopefully you have a general idea of Doom's universe and how the events of the game tie into it, but I also hope you can see just how much the story relies on its codex. With that discussion out of the way, it's time to talk about the DLC, starting with the Ancient Gods Part 1. I'll be referring to this as TAG1 from here on, and the second DLC would be TAG2. I have the most to say about TAG1 as far as actual criticisms go, and that's mostly because of the difficulty spike between it and the base game. I'd like to start off by saying that TAG1 has already received a nerf in many of its fights, and you can find a good comparison vid by DoomGuyBot in the description if you're curious about the changes. I didn't play the DLC at launch, so all my opinions come from the current patch of the game. My first impression of the DLC was that it felt more akin to Master levels than anything else, but then I went back and played the Super Gorness Master level after beating all the DLCs, and I realized that wasn't an accurate description. TAG1 is undeniably harder than the base game, but nothing about it is inherently unfair, although there are some moments that feel that way sprinkled in, like getting stuck in a hallway with a tyrant out of nowhere. This isn't a difficult encounter, but neither is the possessed Pinky and Mancubus from TAG2 that I mentioned at the beginning of the video. It's just that it comes out of nowhere and can feel unfair in the moment. This also causes the awkward scenario of the DLCs being both much easier and more enjoyable the second time through, which is a shame because it originally left me with such a bad impression that I almost never played it again. The only reason I did was because I had to resort to lowering the difficulty for the final boss and wanted to complete it on Nightmare. TAG1 can best be described with the phrase, "but wait, there's more." The first time I played through the DLC, I felt like the fights were way too long. I distinctly remember playing the final section of UAC Atlantica and shouting at my monitor, "Are you kidding me, there's more?" because I thought the fight was over and there were 2 or 3 waves left. A usual level from the base game would only take me about 45 minutes to get through, whereas I averaged an hour and a half for each level in TAG1, and I needed to take a break and walk away from my PS4 about every 30 minutes or so because the fights were draining me that much. I now understand what id was going for here, and in these ways TAG1 is more akin to the master levels in the base game. This DLC is testing you on everything that it taught you in the base game and training your ability to handle long encounters. More than anything else, TAG1 is an endurance test, and I think it's very successful at that. My first time getting through the final level in the DLC took me 2 hours to complete, and if you ignore the amount of time I spent in cutscenes, exploration, and completing the Slayer Gate, then that's closer to about an hour and a half. My second time through, I completed the level in 50 minutes and didn't struggle near as much during the boss. I think knowing what to expect from each encounter played a large role in this, but I feel it was really all the training I received over the course of the DLC that made me end those fights quicker. TAG1 taught me many things over the course of its runtime, but the biggest things I took away from it were more efficient ways to kill demons and using the meat hook to remain in the air during a fight. I still don't feel like I'm a pro at the game, but I'm certainly much more knowledgeable on how to do things than I was before. Some of the more useful things I learned include not trying to blood punch a Cyber Mancubus armor right away, because if you do a little damage first, then the blood punch will kill it immediately. If you're in a situation where you do need to get the armor off, then ice bombing it is a good strategy to prevent it from doing an AoE slam, which it likes to do when you get too close. These may sound like obvious solutions, but fights in the base game never lasted long enough to warrant me trying to avoid taking as much damage as possible, and nothing really pushed me to experiment the way that TAG1 did. You'll be fighting many high-level enemies like Tyrants and Barons in the DLC, and you'll definitely be fighting more than one of them at a time, so you need to learn how to identify and eliminate targets faster and more effectively than before. Kiting a Baron with a chain gun isn't going to cut it in most fights, so you'll need to get familiar with your ice bombs and start utilizing everything at your disposal more than ever. TAG1 was also where id started experimenting with more challenge areas, like spawning in a bunch of shield soldiers and a Doom Hunter but leaving you with a plethora of plasma ammo on the ground, or spawning in a dozen Pinkies and a few Cyber Mancubus but leaving blood punch drops everywhere. These would only be expanded upon in the second DLC, and I think it shows how id is willing to have fun with their mechanics and give you more interesting encounters that feel more like puzzles than straight up combat. I think you get the idea for how TAG1's gameplay goes, so let's move on to things that were added by the DLC. You need to start a separate save file to play the DLC, which has all runes, suit upgrades, and weapon mods unlocked and mastered. New runes have been added called support runes that are designed to further help you in combat. These give you options like regaining an extra life you lost by killing the demon that previously killed you within a certain time frame, dealing a concussive blast by destroying weak points, or making blood punches deal double damage when your health is low. The most notable addition, however, are the spirits. These enemies possess demons and give them increased damage resistances and attack speed. It may seem like the possessed enemies have more health, but they actually don't. They have anywhere from 60 to 80% damage resistance against certain weapons, with the resistances varying from demon to demon. They don't have more attack damage, but they can attack quicker due to the speed boost, so their DPS is higher, and you can get stun-locked by them, especially the possessed pain elemental, which can stun-lock you in mid-air. Possessed demons can't be faltered without the use of the plasma rifle's microwave beam mod. The spirit can only be killed after you've killed its host, and as of now it takes about 4 seconds or 75 plasma cells to kill it. I heard something about this being nerfed to 65 plasma cells, which would make dealing with possessed enemies much more manageable since it feels like it takes too long to take them out as it is now. I highly recommend researching the possessed demon's resistances before attempting TAG1 so you can have at least a basic idea of what to expect while fighting them. There's a very good breakdown video that you can find a link for down below if you're interested in the topic. It's strange to me that you can't kill a spirit by microwave beaming the demon possessing it. This seems like it should be a perfectly viable way to take care of them, but doing so just results in the demon dying and you needing to microwave the spirit again. I think this should be changed to allow them to be killed in this way since you are technically cooking the spirit alive, but I would make the spirit extend the amount of time it takes to beam the demon so you can't just stagger them and then take it out in a few seconds. For example, if it takes 20 plasma cells to kill a basic zombie at full health, plus the 75 to kill a spirit, then trying to kill them both at once would cost 95. This would cost more ammo to get the job done, but would also give you more strategies to deal with the spirits, so you don't need to stand still while you wait for the spirit to die. A good strategy I use is to ice bomb all the demons around me while I beam the spirit, but allowing you to kill both at once would mean you're trading ammo efficiency for the ability to beam the demon, and if you need to move positions, then you know that the spirit is still in that demon. This opens up additional strategies like chipping away at its health while dealing with everything else in the field, and knowing that you can kite the demon to a safer area in the more claustrophobic encounters. I think this would be a fair balance that still leaves the choice of focusing down the possessed demon and rewarding the player with a lower ammo cost should they decide to take the risk and sit in one spot for 4 seconds. As it stands, there's only really one way to take care of a spirit, leaving this enemy with the least amount of strategic depth. The only other new enemies are the turret, which can be killed with a quick precision bolt ballista combo, and the Bloodmaker, which is invulnerable until it goes to attack, in which case you need to land a headshot to kill it, similar to the Maker drones. They don't refill all your health, which means I don't like this enemy as much as I do the drones. It does give you full ammo, but the amount of health they give you is negligible. They can also slow you down if you get hit by their spear toss, which means you should focus them down the moment you get the chance, whereas Maker drones can be held until you really need them. This is actually a positive balancing change that I simply don't like because it made the boss fight even harder. Other than that, there's not much to say about them. On that note, let's go ahead and get into the story. TAG1 only has 3 missions, and it shouldn't take too long to summarize the events. I won't be getting into the expanded lore on this DLC because it's just going to be retconned in the next one. You start off on the Ark's aircraft carrier. Samuel Hayden says that you need the help of somebody called the Seraphim in order to regain control of Urdak. Awakening the Icon of Sin allowed the demons to gain control of it, and your job is to reseal the place and set it back to its former glory. This has you traveling to the UAC Atlantica facility to find the Seraphim's body and resurrect him. The facility self-destructs after you get the Seraphim key, and you proceed to the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean to find the Seraphim's body. The sharks are only hostile if you stand in front of them, which really sucks because I wanted a quick time event where I glory kill a shark. You fight your way into the facility, killing 2 marauders at once in the process, then finally find the Seraphim's body. Samuel Hayden transfers himself into the machine to resurrect him, and then you speak to the Seraphim directly, who is revealed to be Samuel Hayden himself. He says that he knew who you were the moment you set foot in Argent D'Nur, and basically says you can thank him for having the foresight to enhance you with the divinity machine so you could save the world from the demons. He also says that you owe it to the Father to repay him for what they did for you, and tells you to return him to his throne. I didn't talk much about the Father during the lore discussion because most of the details surrounding his disappearance is revealed in this DLC. I'll explain more at the end of TAG2 Story. You make it back to the Ark carrier where the intern, who is quite possibly the only person on this ship who isn't afraid of you, tells you that there's something wrong with the Seraphim. The Seraphim tells you the location of the Father's life sphere in the blood swamps of hell, then tells you that his body is undergoing rapid transfiguration and he needs the Father to help him. By acquiring the life sphere, you can bring the Father back to physical form, then he tells you to be thankful for being given the opportunity to serve the gods once again.
I see your mission objective states that you're going to destroy the sphere, not retrieve it.
Yeah, as you can imagine, we're not going to do that. To acquire the life sphere, you need to go through the trials of Malagog, which requires you to go through several high-intensity combat encounters. There are some interesting gimmicks like being shielded from poison fog by a ghost dog and needing to remain within the bubble as you fight, and overall, it's a very fun level to get through. It shows how much challenge can be added to an encounter with something as simple as low visibility. Once you finish the 2 trials, you fight a boss in the form of some giant cubes that require you to shoot its eye when it's opened. It's not the toughest thing in the world, but the demons that chase you around can get a little annoying. Once you've beaten it, you're lifted to the Sanctum where the Seraphim is waiting for you. He tells you to hurry and take the Father's life sphere so he can save Urdak, quote, for the human's sake. It's obvious by the way he's talking that he's only interested in his own self-preservation, so you destroy the life sphere, which incapacitates the Seraphim. You then grab the purple life sphere that was behind the Father's and hear the Dark Lord ask if you're prepared for what you're about to do. The intern warns you that this is the Dark Lord's life sphere and that he'll take physical form if you do what you're thinking, but you take it anyways and make your way back to the Ark carrier. Once you arrive, you show the captain your new lava lamp. He apparently doesn't like it very much because he orders everybody to evacuate. The intern decides to stay because he's the only one here who isn't a little bitch, and he understands what you're trying to do. Once the Dark Lord takes physical form, he can be killed. You're teleported to Urdak, and the intern tells you that anybody who managed to bring a life sphere back is worthy enough to resurrect them, so the makers of the Luminarium will have no no choice but to help you. As you fight your way through the Holt, the father starts contacting you thinking that you've brought his life sphere. It's confirmed by the intern that Vega is the father, and you left him here before you fought the Conmaker. He knows everything about Urdak, but is having a hard time remembering many things about himself, and he believes his life sphere could help him out with that. He doesn't know that you destroyed his life sphere back at the Sanctum. You make your way to the Luminarium where you're cut off by the Seraphim, and you get your first chance to witness the Transfiguration, where he turns into a monster that looks more like the demons than anything else. I guess we better discuss the Seraphim's boss fight. Here's a breakdown of his moveset. He can throw orbs at you that will slow you down if the attack lands, and he can summon floating orbs that will chase you around and shock you if they get too close. The floating orbs are dealt with the same way as the turrets, so they're not too difficult to handle. The Seraphim alone isn't too much of a challenge, but in his second phase he'll summon 2 possessed demons that must be killed in order to progress. These 2 aren't too difficult since the Mencubus won't chase you around, giving you some breathing room to deal with the Hell Knight first. After this, you're put in a minute-long section where you jump between 4 platforms, watching out for damage zones while cacodemons are on infinite respawn. A good tactic I saw online is to equip the rune that keeps enemies staggered for longer and shoot sticky bombs in their mouth to preserve your ammo and run down the clock. The next phase is just like the first, except the arena has moved many of the platforms and bloodmakers have started to spawn in. There are several portals around the arena that can be used to navigate it better, although this runs the risk of putting you right next to the Seraphim. The final phase has him spawning in a possessed Dread Knight and Pain Elemental, and this is the worst phase of the entire fight. It's not explicitly stated, but the goal here is to deal with the Pain Elemental as fast as humanly possible. Bloodmakers will still continue to spawn, so you'll need to watch out for them, but the Pain Elemental is the biggest headache of this section. Bear in mind that in order to kill the spirit, you'll need to hang out for 5 seconds or so while you beam it, so there's still a lot to manage during this phase. The Pain Elemental can still respawn, which means the spirit can just repossess it if you're not careful. The real problem stems from the Pain Elemental itself. While it's possessed, it can throw its projectiles much faster than normal, and the combination of it and the Bloodmakers can feel a bit overwhelming. Not to mention the damage resistances that the possession brings can make it feel like a bullet sponge, and 2 direct BFG shots from across the room aren't even enough to take it out instantly, although the BFG's tendrils will stun it. The first time I did this fight, I thought it was borderline unfair, but after I looked up some strategies on YouTube and tried it again, I realized that isn't the case. The problem is that the longer you're in the fight, the more likely you are to die, so this is something you want to get out of the way quickly. The number of people I've seen online say that this fight made them break rules like not using the BFG or Sentinel armor says a lot about this difficulty, and the fact that my second attempt was leagues better than the first sums up a lot of my feelings about this DLC. It's at its worst when you don't know what's going to happen. Once you've defeated the Seraphim, the father steps in, telling you that by his command the Seraphim removed him from Urdak and it's not necessary for you to kill him. He then teleports him out of the room and tells you that your mission here is now your own. You make your way through the Luminarium and present the Dark Lord's orb. The rest of the cutscene I'll play out.
The Dark Lord is the leader of Hell's armies. Not a king, but a warrior of the Dark Realm. The fiercest among them, as only the strongest could rule the demons. It is you, in their world.
I've seen a lot of people misinterpret this scene, so allow me to explain. The Dark Lord and the Doomslayer are not the same person. What the father was saying is that the Dark Lord is Hell's equivalent of the Doomslayer, and it's likely that the Dark Lord took his form as either a flex or just out of spite for the Slayer constantly disrupting his invasions. That's the end of Tag 1. I think it was an admirable attempt for id to offer a rewarding challenge, although a lot of things can feel frustrating over the course of the DLC. I think the Seraphim was a terrible boss that drove me to near madness during its final phase, but it wasn't unfair, it was just annoying. Id clearly understood the criticism this DLC received, because much of it would be addressed going forward, which brings us to Tag 2. I have even less to say about this DLC than I did the last one, which is strange because it's more pages, but what I can say is that the DLC is much less challenging than the previous one, at least at first glance. Honestly, I don't think Tag 2 is much easier than Tag 1. The difficulty has just been shifted. The average Tag 1 encounter would throw everything it could at you for 10 minutes straight, whereas Tag 2 is much more reserved, and fights don't appear to last as long. Regardless, much of the difficulty from the previous DLC is still present in Tag 2, it's just been shifted away from the enemies you face. First, a lot of arenas are much closer quarters than they were in the first DLC, which results in fewer enemies being more effective by giving you less room to breathe. I've also noticed that the game throws more fodder demons at you than anything else, which resulted in me getting body blocked a lot while playing. This probably goes hand in hand with the inclusion of meat hook platforming sections. These were strangely absent in the base game and were included to make traversal a little more interesting for this DLC, but they also serve as an important lesson, one that I picked up on quickly in the last DLC. Your meat hook is the best way to keep you in the air. The reason that tyrants quickly became my favorite enemy in Tag 1 is because they're big enough to not give me lock-on issues while playing on controller and can swing me higher in the air than any other enemy. It's no coincidence that you're given less ground room to work with and can get body blocked much easier in Tag 2. You're even put to the test with this technique when you're put against a brazier challenge with purple sludge on the floor. You're meant to use your meat hook to swing in the air and stay there as long as you can. Despite this, I feel that a lot of Tag 2's encounters are more tedious than difficult, and that's mostly because of some of the new enemies. The Screecher zombies will buff all nearby demons if they're killed. The buff is unique in that it's basically a cross between buff totems and spirits. When an enemy is buffed by a Screecher, it can't be frozen or faltered, but unlike the spirit, its weak points can still be destroyed. The Screecher is meant to add a tactical perspective to combat where you need to pay attention to what tool you use, and most AoEs like grenades are going to be off limits. Personally, I find fighting around these enemies extremely tedious, although there is some interesting tactical advantage to them. Since they don't buff enemies before being killed, you can flame belch a large group of them and create a pool of armor on one end of the arena while you continue fighting on the other end. Although that's about the most experimentation you can get out of it, and you can technically do that with anything. They don't even stay flame belched for long, but hey, it's an option. The other, arguably worse enemy in the game is the Cursed Prowler. This is an enemy that will inflict a curse debuff if it hits you that disables your dash and prevents you from targeting it with lock-on weapons like the rocket launcher and meat hook, although they will work for other enemies. You will also take damage over time while you're cursed, and it will be immune to all your attacks except for a blood punch. There will be a large icon that will track the Prowler through walls when the curse is active, although it also becomes more defensive and tries to run away from you. I'd like to say up front that I never once got cursed during this playthrough, and that's because I did this anytime I saw a cursed Prowler spawn. I believe there are only 3 Cursed Prowlers in the entire DLC, and they have still managed to become universally hated. I think requiring a blood punch to kill them would work much better if the game refilled your blood punch meter when the curse is inflicted, because as of today, it doesn't do this. This means that if you use your blood punch and immediately get cursed, then you'll be stuck taking damage until you get it back. This is when it's good to use the heavy cannon to stagger a fodder demon for a quick glory kill to get the blood punch back, and there's no shortage of fodder demons in this DLC. However, the best solution to the problem is to simply not get cursed, and the absolute safest way to handle this enemy is to use the chain gun shield mod and focus it down. It doesn't take very long to kill them this way, and you can't be cursed as long as the shield is up. I've never had a problem with this enemy because of how effective this tactic is. Another new enemy added was the Stone Imp. These are like normal imps except with more damage resistance to your weapons, putting them on seemingly about the same level as a Hell Knight. They're vulnerable to the Combat Shotgun's Full Auto mod or a hit from the Sentinel Hammer. I think this was id's way of trying to push Full Auto into prominence like they did with the Microwave Beam in the first DLC, but absolutely nothing in this game is going to make me use Full Auto on my shotgun, so I tend to just hit them with a fully charged Destroyer Blade and kill them instantly. The Stone Imp can also roll towards you like Sonic, which can be a little annoying to deal with when there are a lot of them, but it's also pretty easy to dodge when you see it coming. Yet another new enemy added is the Riot Soldier. These are like the shielded soldiers, except they have a Gatling gun and their shield is immune to all damage. The best way to deal with them is with the rocket launcher's remote detonation mod or shooting grenades behind their shield. These enemies are pretty simple and not much of an issue. The final enemy is the Armored Baron. You can't damage it until you've taken care of its armor, and there are various different ways you can do that. Shooting it with a plasma rifle can break it, although the microwave beam works much faster. Beaming it won't actually stagger it though, so it leaves you open to an attack. The easiest way to break the armor is to shoot its mace when it flashes green. The armor will remain broken for a couple seconds before repairing itself, which means you only have a brief window to deal any real damage to it. Freezing it with an ice bomb will give you a little more time, and using that in tandem with the Sentinel Hammer can help you kill it in a single cycle. Another enemy introduced is the Amora Guard. All these enemies, except for one, are just remixes of enemies we've already seen in the game so far, which is fine because they didn't need to add much more at this stage in the game. There are many other things that have been added to make these encounters more interesting, so let's get into the final one, the Sentinel Hammer. This is your replacement for your Crucible, and it differs in many ways. Where the Crucible was a one-shot kill on applicable demons, the Hammer is a tool used to stun them and get resources. Hitting enemies with the Hammer will cause them to drop ammo and daze them for a few seconds. If you freeze and flame belch them first, you'll get health and armor in addition to the ammo. Hitting a dazed Marauder with the Sentinel Hammer will cause it to remain dazed for a longer period of time, making this your ultimate Marauder killing tool. The Sentinel Hammer can be recharged by performing glory kills or destroying weak points, in addition to various hammer charges you can find throughout the levels. Unfortunately for us console players, you can't bring the hammer into the base game, although you can on PC by using mods or manipulating the game's files. I think you should be given the choice to bring it back into the base game in Tag 1 as a reward for completing the DLC, and if the the concern is that it will make Ultra Nightmare runs too easy, then either make it a requirement to beat the base game first, or make it a cheat code that must be activated to use it. I never got enough time with the Sentinel Hammer to really make good use of it, which is a shame because I think it's a fun tool to mess around with. The only issues I found with the hammer is that using it to daze a Marauder and then hitting it with an Ice Bomb will end the daze prematurely. This is likely because the Ice Bomb adds a debuff that slows the Marauder by a small amount, and this can't be stacked with the extended daze effect, so it overrides it instead. We're getting into the final stretch of the video, where all that's left is to discuss TAG2 Story and lore, and as always, the final boss of the game is bundled with the story discussion. For those of you watching who really don't care and just want to hear my final thoughts on the boss, there will be a timestamp in the description where you can skip to that part. For everybody else, let's get into it. The DLC begins where we left off before, with the Dark Lord being resurrected. You try killing him immediately, but the Luminarium is protected grounds where nobody can die. The Dark Lord tells you to find him in the city of Amora where he'll be waiting for you. You then teleport back to Argent Dinner to travel to a place called the World Spear. As you travel, you'll see a projection of Commander Valen who offers you his Sentinel Hammer, saying that his son has been laid to rest and he has atoned for his sins. You then travel to a beacon called the Torch of Kings and light it. The Dayak had forbidden the use of the beacon since it grants you access to the World Spear, and the Father says that any free tribes of Argent Dinner will understand your mission and see it as a call to arms. You're then picked up by a dragon that bears your mark and flown to the mountain housing the spear. The intern says that you must not be the only one who wants your mission to succeed, because if the Dark Lord is killed, then any demon outside of Hell dies with him. There's a cool Easter egg in this level that is only accessible after you've unlocked fast travel. If you come back to this area, then you can find a sword lodged near the ground, and activating it will summon 5 Marauders for you to fight at once. This is a nice way of giving console players the ability to try out what PC players have been doing for months now, and it's actually a really good encounter. You fight your way up the mountain where you reach the World Spear, where you learn that this is a giant ship housing hundreds of elemental wraiths in some form of stasis. You can also sort of make out what they look like, and they're similar to the ones seen in the well in Doom 2016. You pick up a Sentinel Crystal, and the intern says that you need to travel to something called the Gate of Devum. This brings us to the next level, Reclaimed Earth. You fight your way through the city streets until you come to the gate, and use the Sentinel Crystal to travel to Amora. The next cutscene is essentially an Avengers Endgame reference. You teleport to the city of Amora and see the army of demons that stand against you, then watch as Commander Valen, who I have now come to understand is pronounced Commander Valen, I'm sorry for everybody who that bothered, and the remaining Knight Sentinels, uncorrupted by the Dayak, teleport in to assist you. This has now turned into a full-scale war between yours and Hell's armies. You fight your way through the city until you come to the Dark Lord's Sanctum, where the final boss awaits. Standing before you is the Dark Lord, and this Warhammer 40k looking ass Super Marauder is the most tedious boss in the entire game. It's not as difficult as the Seraphim, but it was certainly more annoying for more of its runtime. Where the Seraphim was annoying during 1 or 2 phases of the fight, the Dark Lord is annoying for pretty much the entire thing. Most of the reason that I dislike this boss is because there's very little challenge involved, and because of how easy he is, he has some very annoying mechanics to compensate. Let's start with the basics. The Dark Lord has 5 health bars that you must deplete in order to win the fight. His moveset is a mashup between yours and the Marauders. He has a shoulder-mounted gun that shoots you at a range, an Argent Sword and Shield, and he'll shoot grenades at you after the first stage. He starts off summoning dogs that drop half a Sentinel charge when killed and can be killed instantly with the Sentinel Hammer. As the fight progresses, he'll start summoning demons of all kinds that can be dealt with the same way. You need to shoot him when his eyes flash green to daze him, and if you use the Sentinel Hammer, he remains dazed for a longer period of time, giving you much more time to soak him with damage. The fight is pretty basic, and there's little variation between the stages. The annoyance comes from the Dark Lord's passive abilities. If he deals damage to you with his sword or shield, then he regains a fair chunk of his health. If you shoot him when his eyes aren't flashing green, then this will also cause him to regain lost health. He can easily refill his health bar in a handful of mistakes, but once you know what to watch out for, then you'll realize that this boss is way too easy. There's so little keeping you from wrecking the Dark Lord that it makes this health regeneration gimmick feel more like a safety net than anything else, which is a little disappointing for a fight that was hyped up for 2 entire DLCs. The big issue I have with this fight is that it doesn't flow very well. Think back to when I was describing the various ways you can take care of a Marauder in this game despite its defensive capabilities, and how many people at launch thought the only way to fight him was to stand at mid-range and wait for his eyes to flash green. Because of the Dark Lord's health regeneration abilities, this is the only way to fight him, which for the first time in the entire game is truly restricting your creativity. My favorite thing about fighting the Marauder is how many different ways you can play aggressively while still being defensive, but you can't do any of this with the Dark Lord. Even with the Gladiator fight, you could find ways to sneak sneak in an extra bit of damage here and there, but you just can't do this with this encounter. You can't bait his stab from long range like you can in Marauder, so this fight really does sum up to just waiting around at mid-range until the gaming gods bless you with an opening to attack, then soaking him with damage whenever you get the chance. To put it bluntly, this fight is far too simple for how far you've come, and I'd even go as far as to say that it was the first boring boss fight in the entire game. I have heard that it is working on the Dark Lord's healing abilities, but as with everything else, I can't say what they intend to do about it. I have quite a few ideas for how this fight could be better, so let me start with the more practical options. Give the player more opportunities to play proactively and reward experimentation like the game has done up until this point. Something as simple as shooting grenades behind the Dark Lord's shield goes a long way towards keeping the player engaged and feeling like they have some form of control over the fight. I think the amount that the Dark Lord heals himself should be reduced, and to compensate for this, his sword swings and turret shots should come slightly faster. I also think hitting the Dark Lord with the Sentinel Hammer when his eyes aren't flashing green shouldn't heal him, because sometimes you might go to Hammer Strike to summon demons and end up healing him by accident. All this does is make the fight longer, not more difficult. Let's talk about the potential that this boss fight has to be something great. The Dark Lord could have been the boss that really tests your ability to maximize your DPS within a short window and end difficult encounters before they have a chance to get out of control. As of now, the only thing it was testing was my patience. The Dark Lord's window to daze him is longer than the Marauders and the Gladiators, and after hitting with a Sentinel Hammer, you're basically guaranteed to take off almost half of his health bar before he recovers as long as you know what you're doing. If it weren't for his healing ability, the fight would last a total of 30 seconds to anybody who has made it this far, and even with his healing ability, it doesn't affect much once you know how to avoid triggering it. It only gets easier when you realize that the move that opens him for a daze is always the same. There's really not a lot to learn with this boss fight, and once you've seen all his tricks, there's nothing stopping you from abusing him to no extent. Here are the changes I propose, and keep in mind this is going to make for a completely different boss fight entirely. These changes would also only apply to Nightmare mode. Make his eyes flash green every time he goes to attack, but your window of opportunity is closer to that of a buffed or possessed Marauder. You've literally fought both of these in the last DLC, so I don't see why this is a bad change. If the Dark Lord himself lands an entire combo on you, aka if you lack the reaction time to get out of the way or stun him during his 3-hit combo, then it knocks all the ammo out of your current weapon you're holding and locks it for 5 seconds, forcing you to switch up your strategy but not being overly punishing. In addition to this, the Dark Lord can't recover health from hitting you but also has twice as much health as he currently does. Even on Nightmare difficulty, you can end a phase in about 3 cycles with lock-on rockets, and considering that you can do weapon combos much faster on PC, I'm sure he's even more of a pushover there. For the sake of variety, I think the Dark Lord should go through more drastic changes as the fight goes on, just like the Gladiator did. I'd say after the first few health bars when you trigger the first cutscene, he should lose his shield but get more aggressive and has an overshield that can be taken down with a plasma rifle or by using the Sentinel Hammer. His overshield would drop whenever he prepares to attack so you can still daze him, but players who were tired of the song and dance would now have another way to take care of him at the cost of their hammer charges, which would leave them vulnerable if he decides to summon more demons into the fight like he does now. This would also be the point where he starts dropping grenades with larger AoEs to keep you moving. A change like this also brings more variety to the fight, because as it stands, it goes pretty much the exact same way every time. His increased health pool will also prevent this from being over too soon, and it would give enemies like the Armored Baron more prominence in the DLC as they've been secretly training you for this portion of the fight. I think you can see my general problem with the fight. It has a serious lack of variety, and it feels far too easy for the lore behind this encounter. As you're probably aware, I'm not a developer or a QA tester, so I'm not exactly sure how these concepts would play out in practice. I was actively fighting the Dark Lord whenever I wrote this section, and I don't think this would be much more frustrating than any of the other bosses, but above all else, I hope it makes some drastic changes to this boss fight and makes it much more engaging. On that note, let's move on and finish up the story. The Dark Lord's boss fight will take you through 3 arenas. The first is in Amora, the second is back on Earth in the city where the first level of the game takes place, and the third is the Sanctum where you destroyed the Father's life sphere. Halfway through the fight, the Dark Lord will stop to inform you that he is the true god of the universe. The Father will confirm this, saying that he rose to power after sealing away the Dark Lord, then declared himself as the new god of the universe. The fight continues afterwards, which of course results in your victory. The ending cutscene goes like this.
Tell me, have you nothing to say to your creator before you strike him down?
You're fired.
After killing the Dark Lord and vanquishing every demon outside of Hell's domain, the Slayer falls unconscious and is sealed away in another sarcophagus by the Makers, left at the Sanctum. It's unclear exactly what happened, but interviews with Hugo Martin confirm that the Slayer is not dead. It's likely that killing the Dark Lord weakened him, since the power from the Divinity Machine also came from him. So all that's left for this video before I give my final thoughts is the lore, and this is much easier to explain than it was the last time. TAG1's Codex gives a history of the Dark Lord and the Makers that is revealed in TAG2 to have been fabricated by the Father so he could cover up for what he did. It goes like this. The god Davoth creates the city of Jakad but was struggling to find a way to give immortality to his creations. The mortal flesh couldn't handle the immortal spirit, so all his experiments ended in failure. He created the Makers to help him figure out the secret, and whenever they did, they deemed Davoth too unstable for the knowledge, so they sealed him in Jakad away and removed his essence into the life sphere. Everybody got super pissed off and Jakad was transformed into hell. The Father was reluctant to kill Davoth outright because he still respected him as his creator, so they decided to leave him in the Sanctum. Everything that came afterwards would be a direct result of Davoth's influence, since he could still function as a disembodied entity. He convinced the Khan Maker that somebody would rise up and destroy Urdak. Then he convinced the Seraphim that the Khan Maker was crazy and would lead their people to ruin. This is what prompted the Seraphim to lead you to the Divinity Machine and grant you with the power you have now. From this point, all that was left was for you to do what you did and leave Urdak in ruin. What Davoth didn't anticipate was you being able to kill him, which seems like a clear oversight for the supposed creator of the universe. I think this explanation of the lore sort of conflicts with things learned in the base game, like how the Makers wouldn't already have the knowledge of Argent Energy if they were aware of Hell's presence, and how the discovery of the demons was brought about by the Slayer's arrival. This also calls into question how the Wraiths could be viewed as a threat to the Makers when they're essentially just space monsters that produce Wraith energy, which also calls into question the difference between Argent Energy seen in Doom 2016, which comes from the power of the Wraiths, and Argent Energy seen in Eternal, which comes from the Foundry. Let's also not forget the Darth Vader scream after you kill the Khan Maker that matches the voice of the Dark Lord, but couldn't have been the Dark Lord because destroying Urdak was part of his plan, so you see how that went nowhere. I'm not in a position to answer these questions, but I wanted to raise them anyways. This also isn't to say that there aren't answers for these questions, and I'm sure Hugo Martin would be more than happy to answer them if he was asked during one of his interviews. So after a conclusion like that, we're left with one question. Is this the end of Doom? Personally, I don't think so, but it's very possible that we may not get another Doom game for some time unless it figures out how to create a new antagonist that doesn't feel contrived. A Doom game without demons would be decidedly not Doom for many people, which means the series might go on hiatus for a while. I think this would be a great chance for id to dive into another one of their older series, Quake. The Lovecraftian elements of the Makers stood out to myself and many others as something that would work perfectly if tied into the Quake universe. And with the demons seemingly defeated for the foreseeable future, I think this would be a great opportunity to step off of Doom and give Quake fans something new for a change. Recall back to the very beginning of this video when I said Doom 2016 introduced the franchise to an entire generation of players who either hadn't heard of it or didn't care enough to try it before its release. Quake is another classic id shooter that has more or less fallen by the wayside in recent years, and seeing as how they both successfully expanded both Doom's core mechanics and universe with Eternal, I don't see why they can't extend this to Quake. Regardless, Doom appears to be finished for the time being, and I'm interested to see what id has in store for us in the future. Thanks for watching, guys. I want to apologize again for how long it took me to get this video done. I don't plan on falling out of the groove of pumping out videos once a month, and while this video may not seem like it covered as much as I hyped up in the beginning, a lot of sections required a lot of testing to make sure I was correct, especially where the issues were concerned. I wanted to take a moment to shout out two criminally underrated channels that you should check out. The first one is the larger of the two, Joystick Drummer. He covers a variety of topics that talk more about games and the game industry outside of being solely a critic or news channel. You can tell by both how he talks and the quality of his content that he's very passionate about these subjects, and he puts in a great amount of effort to be entertaining without being so over the top that it becomes distracting or interferes with the point he's trying to make. He also edits himself into his videos while he's talking, which automatically puts his content at a higher quality of editing than anything I do. Overall, he's a great channel to follow if you like more nuanced discussions about video games and the industry that don't boil down to X company made Y decision and it's bad because of Z. The second channel I'd like to shout out is much smaller, having just over 50 subscribers as of the time of writing this. Input Source is a game reviewer whose videos usually range from 2 to 5 minutes, which to somebody with my attention span who considers anything less than 30 minutes as short, this is a bit insane. If you're anything like me, which you probably are if you got this far, then you'll be surprised just how informative these videos are given their length. His videos are light on spoilers and mostly focus on explaining whether or not a game is worth your time without going off on a dozen different tangents like I tend to. He also reviews plenty of games that aren't as mainstream while not falling into Mandalore levels of obscurity either, and I think his channel is perfect for people who want to know as little as possible going into a game while still getting enough information to decide whether it's for you. If nothing else, his videos are short enough to where if you still don't feel convinced, you won't feel like you wasted your time either. I think that both Joystick Drummer and Input Source have their own unique niche that is bound to appeal to somebody, and I can very easily see them both being very successful in the future if they keep up the hard work. I always like seeing channels that take steps to set themselves apart from everybody else instead of just following trends or chasing the algorithm's siren call, and it's hard not to appreciate how passionate they are about their work, although clearly some of us aren't as passionate as we should be or this video wouldn't be late. Oops. I highly urge you to check out their content and see if any of their topics interest you. With all that being said, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video. Again, I'm sorry it was a little bit late, and I will see you in the next one.